Chapter 358. This woman was not a good person. In the base, she relied on the fact that she was the leader's sister to be condescending and bully the weak. When she walked in the base, she was a rude and narrow-minded woman. She often took away the items that others wanted to exchange in the trading center, but did not give anything to the other party. Or she would take away other people's valuable items and give them cheap and worthless things. Anyway, as long as she liked it, she must get it, and generally, there was only one method, which was to rob. Fortunately, she was not a man. If she was a man, she would definitely rob a woman. If there was a woman that the people in the base hated the most was Lu Tianyu, then the second was Yang Yan. So now that they saw this woman dead, many people were happy in their hearts. But in front of Yang Chao, they did not show it. They only secretly felt good in their hearts. As soon as Yang Chao brought Yang Yan's body up, he immediately successfully attracted everyone's attention. Zhou Shihui, Wu Qingyue, and the others stood up from their seats, then left their seats and walked toward the body. The wound on the head obviously is traces of being bitten by a beast, and the arm was bitten off. It is very likely that it was a large zombie beast. Zhou Shihui went forward and squatted down to check the wound, then said. Wu Qingyue stood behind him with his hands in his trouser pockets and nodded in agreement. He nodded in agreement, indeed. Zhou Shihui stood up and asked Yang Chao, "Did you see the murderous zombie beast?" Yang Chao shook his head with a gloomy expression and said, "When I went over, it was already like this." The people protecting her said that they did not see anything appear. Zhou Shihui and Wu Qingyue looked at each other and said, "Then where did this zombie beast come from?" I don't know where the zombie beast came from. However, I do know how that level 7 Arcanist came in. Suddenly, a hoarse voice rang out strangely. Everyone turned around and saw a woman wearing a hat standing behind Wu Qingyue's row of chairs without them noticing. As soon as they saw Lin Xiao appear, everyone stood up. Because she was not an important member of the base's management, nor was she a senior member. Yet, she appeared directly in their conference hall. If they were discussing something important, wouldn't she have heard everything? "Who is it?" "It's you." "Who are you?" Several voices rang out at the same time. At this time, Lin Xiao was not wearing sunglasses, but her eyes were no longer dark zombie eyes. Instead, it was a pair of transparent white eyes with a hint of brown. Although she didn't look like a normal person, it was impossible to tell that she was a zombie. Wu Qingyue looked at her in surprise. He was the one who said, "It's you," just now. The other two voices belonged to Yang Chao and Zhou Shihui. Lin Xiao walked over from behind and introduced himself. "My surname is Liu. I came with the people from the Netherworld King's base. You might not know who that level 7 metal ability user is, but I do. This is a guest invited in by your chief Yang, but I don't know why he doesn't seem to know anything." As she spoke, she walked towards Yang Chao. "What nonsense are you talking about? Who are you? Is this a place where you should trespass? Get out now." Yang Chao was shocked by Lin Xiao's words and shouted at her in panic. Wu Qingyue said to him lightly, "Why are you panicking? Let me introduce to everyone, this is Miss Liu. She is the partner of the Netherworld King's base, and also the founder of the new base that the Netherworld King's base is preparing to build." After saying that, he turned his head and stared at Lin Xiao's face for a few seconds, and a trace of confusion flashed in his eyes. But soon, he had a slight headache. This female zombie was really here to cause trouble, and she was here to cause trouble. The higher-ups already knew that the Netherworld King's base was going to build a new base. But they rarely saw the current Lin Xiao because she rarely showed her face. On the other hand, the Lin family and Yuan Tianxing often showed their faces. Yang Chao said coldly, "I don't care who she is, irrelevant people get out now." Lin Xiao smiled calmly and said, "Why would I be an unrelated person? Didn't you hear me just now? I'm the informant, reporting that you colluded with the robbers outside and are preparing to carry out a bloodbath in the base." "Shut up. Be careful of your tongue if you talk nonsense again." Yang Chao immediately shouted at her and raised his hand. If Lin Xiao said one more word, he might immediately cut off her tongue. "Wait a minute. Do you have evidence for what you said?" Zhou Shihui quickly stopped Yang Chao, then looked at Lin Xiao and asked. Lin Xiao shook her head and said, I don't have evidence. But you can ask him himself. After saying that, she suddenly reached out to a soldier in military uniform who was standing at the door. Everyone's eyes followed the direction she was pointing. Lin Xiao had long smelled his scent, and the disguise was useless against her. Normally, if someone sneaked in and was pointed out in front of everyone, their first reaction would be to turn around and run with a guilty conscience. But this soldier didn't. When he was pointed at by Lin Xiao, he was slightly stunned. But he quickly recovered and took off the hat on his head with a faint smile. I've been discovered. I'm very curious. You've never seen me before. How did you recognize me? That woman has seen me before, but she didn't recognize me. Tang took off the hat and revealed his face. He turned around and walked in with the hat, then looked at Lin Xiao curiously and asked. After saying that, he pointed at Mo Li, who was beside Wu Qingyue. It's you. How dare you show up? As soon as Mo Li saw him, her ice-cold face couldn't keep up. She immediately pointed at him and shouted, her voice full of anger. Tang just smiled and said, Why wouldn't I dare to come? What can you do to me even if I'm here? After seeing Tang come out, Yang Chao's face changed. He suddenly pointed at Tang and said, You're that level 7 arcanist of unknown origin? Tell me, what's your purpose here? He was obviously trying to cut off his relationship with Tang He. If Tang He said that he knew him, then he would have to admit that he knew him. He could only pretend that he didn't know him and say that Tang He was talking nonsense. However, Tang He just looked at him with an inscrutable expression and said, I'm here to know if your secret experiment was successful. His words made Yang Chao's face change. Before he could say anything, Wu Qingyue on the other side asked calmly, Experiment? Are you talking about diluting a small amount of the virus and injecting it into the bodies of arcanists to turn them into a new type of parasitic zombies? Wu Qingyue's words made Yang Chao on the other side feel that something was wrong. His eyes suddenly turned cold, and he shouted fiercely, Do it! Chapter 359. Under Yang Chao's shout, he suddenly swung his hand at Wu Qingyue and launched an attack with his ability. Countless gusts of wind suddenly broke through the glass window and rushed in, then rolled the entire conference hall out of the window. The wind from Yang Chao's attack was very strong, at least above level 10. Like a typhoon passing through, it instantly flipped the tables and chairs in the room, flying and smashing in the direction of the wind. Everyone was blown away by the wind, and those ordinary people without abilities were swaying left and right. After Wu Qingyue finished his words, he had already mentally prepared himself for Yang Chao's attack. Seeing Yang Chao make a move, he immediately raised his hand and pulled a diagonal line in the air. Rumble. Bolts of lightning fell from the sky and then directly jumped in through the broken window like an electric dragon, converging toward Yang Chao. On the other side, Zhou Shui stood firmly in place and waved his hand. The cement on the wall melted and then converged toward his side, quickly forming a cement wall, protecting the people behind him from the wind. Yang Chao, you really colluded with outsiders. Are you planning to take the base for yourself? His expression sank slightly as he shouted at Yang Chao sternly. Yang Chao dodged to the other side when Wu Qingyue's lightning struck. Then he stood there, the long black military jacket on his body swaying with the wind. He sneered and said, Now that it has come to this, since you all know, then we don't have to pretend to talk. That will be very tiring. I'm the owner of this base, and you all of you can die. After that, Yang Chao pointed at Wu Qingyue and said, Wu Qingyue, I have tolerated you for a long time. If you don't get out of the base with your people today, then all of you will die here. Come out. After Yang Chao suddenly gave the order, the expressions of a small number of people behind him immediately changed. Each and every one of their faces were cold and twisted, and then they opened their eyes wide and began to grit their teeth. Some of the others calmly followed behind Yang Chao, and a small number of them retreated to another corner in a panic, looking at the confrontation between Yang Chao and Wu Qingyue with suspicion. Wu Qingyue just said to him indifferently, Yang Chao, the base was built by everyone together. It is not yours alone, so if you do this now, everyone will not agree. Because the wind in the room had not stopped, the other ability users protected the ordinary people and then pulled them to a corner to avoid the wind. Soon, only Wu Qingyue, Yang Chao, Tang He, and Zhou Shui were left in the middle of the hall. Xiao Yunlong, Yin Fangyu, and several other deputy leaders retreated slightly and stood behind their leaders. Everyone in the conference hall today had contributed greatly to the construction of the base. No one was willing to give up the base that they had worked so hard to build to only one person, even if he was a level 7 ability user. Yang Chao, what you've done behind the scenes isn't beneficial to the base at all. Instead, it's harming everyone. Do you think that by injecting the zombie virus into a human's body, you can increase your strength quickly? Then you should also know that this will only make humans slowly lose their nature. Xiao Yunlong stood behind Wu Qingyue, pointing at Yang Chao and scolding. Yang Chao looked at them with a gloomy face. It turned out that Wu Qingyue already knew about his underground experiment. Did you take away my researchers? He waved his hand to remove the wind in the room and stared at Wu Qingyue. Yang Chao, did we agree to your experiment? No wonder the people in the base have been disappearing for unknown reasons in the past few months, and the number is increasing. You dared to use the living people in the base for experiments, you lunatic. Zhou Shui stared at Yang Chao and questioned him sternly. Yang Chao smiled wantonly and said, "You don't understand. If my experiment is successful, won't we have a powerful army? At that time, my base will expand, and it will be the largest survivor base in the country. At that time, the other bases will have to pay tribute to us with food and supplies. Isn't that good?" Wu Qingyue's smile had a hint of sarcasm. He said, "You are ambitious, but you think too much. There is nothing wrong with you, just that there is something wrong with your brain." Yin Fangyu couldn't help but laugh at Wu Qingyue's words. "Be serious. There's a fight." The bespectacled old man beside her suddenly turned his head and said to her, "Cough." Yin Fangyu immediately stopped smiling. She couldn't laugh. "Be serious. Be serious." Yang Chao's face darkened at Wu Qingyue's words. He said coldly, "Then let's see if I am thinking too much." As he spoke, he suddenly waved his hand again. Countless tornadoes directly rolled in from the outside towards the window. In an instant, the frame of the window was swept away and even the wall was broken. The original window was immediately crushed into a big hole by the rotating wind. At this time, Tang He suddenly and quietly took control of the flying metal objects. Then, he melted them into a large number of sharp objects and shot them in Zhou Shui's direction. Zhou Shui's people saw the sharp metal objects flying towards them. They all stood in place calmly. This was because the concrete wall behind them quickly moved in front of them, blocking the sharp pieces of metal that were shot down from the wall. At this time, the people downstairs all stopped in their tracks. They looked up in surprise at the gusts of wind and thunder at the top of the machine building. Huh? Is that the conference hall above? What's going on? Wind and thunder elements? Did Leader Wu and Leader Yang fight? The people below, who didn't know the situation, pointed up curiously. This morning, a lot of the base's top management went up for a meeting. What's the situation now? Last night's search caused a huge commotion. What happened today? The others all started discussing. Moreover, the people in the distance all gathered here. Looking at the wind and thunder elements, it must be the two leaders fighting. They finally made a move. We've been holding it in for so long. I felt that something big was going to happen today. So it's the leaders fighting. Some people who heard the wind whispered. Anne Lin Xiao, who was done with her business, had already left the machine building in the chaos. Now she stood with her hands crossed in front of her chest. She stood on the roof of a lower building opposite the machine building and watched the show. When she heard what Wu Qingyue said, she finally understood why she felt a strange aura from the people behind Yang Chao. Also, the smell that those people emitted was not right. It turned out that they had been injected with a diluted virus. Their bodies were infected, but this infection was very light, and there was a feeling of mutation in it. It was different from the infection of a normal person after being bitten by a zombie. But they were also different from normal people. Lin Xiao was very curious just now. So this was the case. Looking at the twisted faces of these people, they were indeed a bit similar to the zombies outside. After sensing the fierce battle in the machine building, Lin Xiao turned around and slipped away towards Lin Wenwen's district. And running away after doing something feels so good. Hee. Chapter 360. Actually, Lin Xiao had gone to the inner district government building early in the morning to stir up trouble because Tang He, who had stayed here all night, suddenly left early in the morning. Lin Xiao hadn't been back for long after killing Yang Yin when he sensed Tang He again. However, he didn't see anything even after watching all night. Thus, Lin Xiao watched him all night and only left with him at dawn to watch the show. Lin Xiao returned to the outer district in a few minutes and appeared at the door. Seeing that she didn't say anything, Wei Jingshun and Lin Xiao respectfully opened the door for her. Lin Xiao sniffed and asked before he opened the door, "When did Tiny come over?" Are you talking about Miss Lingling? She just got here not long ago," Wei Jingshun replied as he pushed the door open. Lin Xiao had just walked in when a small figure carrying a ball of gray fur ran over to her. The few people who were gathered in front of the window all looked back. When they saw it was Lin Xiao, they all asked her, "You're back so soon? Didn't they just start fighting?" Lin Xiao rubbed Tiny's head and walked to the sofa as she said, They did start fighting. But I was afraid that someone would come here and cause trouble, so I came back. I reckon that Yang Chao will leave in defeat. He can't beat Wu Qingyue. They've already set up a trap for Yang Chao to jump in." As she spoke, she paused for a moment and looked around before pointing at the little one who followed her thighs to the sofa and asked, "Who brought this child here?" Lin Wenwen walked back and looked at her. "Oh, Captain Huang Ming brought a team of people to escort her here, and then they left." Lin Xiao looked at Tiny strangely and muttered to herself, "Why did he bring the child here? Is the other places not safe? Is this the only place safe?" At this moment, a few explosions suddenly came from the direction that Yuan Tianxing and the others were looking at. It seemed to be very lively over there. "Looks like they've really started fighting, and it's quite intense," Yuan Tianxing said when he saw the commotion over there. Then he turned around and asked Lin Xiao, "What happened when you were over there?" Lin Xiao looked at the little guy and replied without raising his head, "Oh, you're having a verbal battle. I was getting impatient, so I added some fuel for them. Otherwise, I don't know how long it would take for them to make a move." Yuan Tianxing looked at her speechlessly. "You're not going to watch the show. You're going to make it happen, aren't you?" Lin Xiao said lightly. "Of course, if I could beat Yang Chao now, why would I need to wait for Wu Qingyue to make a move?" Lin Wenwen returned to the window and looked outside. After a while, he turned back to look at Lin Xiao. There was a strange light in his eyes, and the smile on his face deepened. Lin Xiao seemed to feel something and turned to look at her. "Are you happy that they are fighting? Look at how happy you are." A thought flashed through Lin Wenwen's mind. He asked a question he already knew the answer to. "How did you know I was secretly happy?" Lin Xiao turned around and took out a writing board, then handed it to Xiao Budian along with the pen. As he taught her how to draw, he said, "The expression on your face says it all." Lin Wenwen smiled. "Well, I didn't expect you to know me so well." Long Qingying looked at Lin Wenwen inexplicably, but her attention was quickly attracted by the battle in the distance. Du Yuanqing stared over there excitedly and said, "I heard that the other leader of this base with the surname Zhou is actually on Wu Qingyue's side. This Yang Chao is fighting the two of them. What kind of trump card does he have? Otherwise, he wouldn't be stupid enough to pick two powerhouses of the same level, right?" Lin Xiao said, "His trump card is that he has a level 7 partner. It's now 2 against 2. Du Yuanqing looked back at her strangely and asked, "Huh? Where did this other one come from?" Lin Xiao said, "He's already here, and that level 7 Arcanist has been watching you guys for the past 2 days. It's just that you guys haven't noticed." When she said that, Yuan Tianxing, Lin Wenwen, and the others were shocked. Then they looked at each other. There was actually a level 7 Arcanist watching them. It seemed that Lu Tianyi and Yin Fengyu's words were not exaggerated at all. Du Yuanqing was also surprised and asked, "Why is he watching us? Did they want to take this opportunity to kidnap Wenwen? If he wanted to fight, he could just do it directly. We don't even have the ability to resist." Lin Xiao glanced at Lin Wenwen and said, his target is indeed Lin Wenwen, but he might have other thoughts. That's why I didn't do anything. She had already sensed that the robber did not completely listen to Yang Chao's words. Moreover, there seemed to be suspicions of using Yang Chao. Who knew if that lunatic Yang Chao knew about this? Yuan Tianxing and the others looked at Lin Wenwen in silence. The smile on Lin Wenwen's face did not fade. She said, "It seems that I am very tempting. Is there any way to change it?" Lin Xiao glanced at her and casually said, "Yes, if you can cut your hair. The shorter the better, like an image. This will reduce the chances of people committing crimes." Lin Wenwen's expression froze for a moment. Then he frowned. After a few seconds of silence, she said something that surprised everyone. "If that's really the case, then I will cut it. What do you think?" Lin Xiao turned to look at her in surprise. "You're willing to do that?" She knew that this girl cherished her long, straight, and smooth hair very much. In the past, she felt that it was a hindrance to look at her hair, so she had asked her to cut it many times. However, Lin Wenwen never agreed, and would even throw a tantrum at her. Now that she had said such a thing, could it be that she was really going to cut it because of what she said? Long Qingying walked over and said to her, "Actually, it doesn't matter whether you cut it or not. You still have to learn to protect yourself. After all, the leader protected you in the past, but now you have to protect yourself." Lin Wenwen looked at Lin Xiao with a complicated expression. However, Lin Xiao did not look at her. Instead, she looked at Tiny Tot and said, "Qingqing is right. After learning to protect yourself, you have to learn to protect others. Family, friends. Don't you feel that you have always been protected by family and friends? Have you ever thought that if one day they suddenly lose the ability to protect you, who can you rely on?" She remembered that she had said these words to Lin Wenwen before. However, at that time, she refused to listen and still loved to rely on others. Even when she went out, she needed someone to follow her. She had never gone out alone. At that time, Lin Xiao felt that she had the ability to protect her family and friends, so she let her go. However, she did not expect that the end of the world would suddenly come. In the end of the world, everything was chaotic and desperate. Only the fittest survived, and those who had the ability could live to the end. Therefore, people who could not even protect themselves in the end of the world were indeed very dangerous. Lin Wenwen stood by the window and stared at Lin Xiao without saying a word. After a few seconds, she suddenly turned around and walked into the bedroom, then closed the door. Chapter 361. The people outside looked at each other. Lin Xiao also raised her head in confusion. She turned to look at the others. Did I say something wrong?" Yuan Tianxing shook his head and sighed. "No, you didn't say anything wrong. Maybe she can't accept what you said at the moment. After all, she used to be a princess in the Pluto base. But now, she should learn how to grow up." Long Qingying expressionlessly crossed her arms and said, "There's no other way. The protective barrier that the leader gave her is gone, so she really needs to learn how to protect herself." Lin Wenwen, who was leaning against the door of the room, could hear their conversation. She gently let go of the door and walked to the dressing table in the room to sit down. Looking at the long-haired woman in the mirror, Lin Wenwen looked down at the long black hair hanging in front of her chest. Then, she used both hands to pick it up. After touching it for a few seconds, she took a deep breath. She suddenly took out a pair of scissors from the drawer and grabbed a lock of long hair. Holding the scissors, she cut it along her ear once, then twice, then thrice. Lin Xiao, who was in the living room, wasn't interested in the battle outside. She was excitedly teaching Tiny Tot how to draw. There was a commotion in the neighborhood. Everyone was curious about what was happening in the inner district and why there was such a big commotion. At this time, the top few floors of the inner district government building were riddled with holes. Yang Chao stepped on a tornado and floated in midair. Wu Chengyue stood on the roof of the building with his hands behind his back. His figure was slender and straight. He wore a strict and cool black military uniform that went above his knees. The hem of the uniform fluttered in the wind, revealing his straight, long legs. He slightly raised his chin. There was a faint smile on his handsome face. but his eyes were cold as he looked at Yang Chao in midair. The people gathered around looked at the situation on the top of the building in confusion. The people in the building also evacuated from the building and ran out from the inside. Wu Qingyue's head was shrouded by a large black cloud, dimming the light in this area. From time to time, muffled sounds of thunder could be heard in the clouds, and flashes of lightning could be seen from time to time. Zhou Shui stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling glass in the middle level of the building. The glass in front of him had all been shattered by their attacks. Because Yang Chao secretly used the humans in the base to conduct dangerous virus experiments, it led to the deaths of the missing people in the past 2 to 3 months. The number of victims had already reached 500. From today onwards, I, together with Leader Wu and the other management personnel, have come to a decision to expel Yang Chao and his subordinates who participated in the experiment from the base. The expulsion list will be announced soon. Please, for the sake of the peace of the base, let's deal with them together. Zhou Shihui's voice was loud and clear, coming down from upstairs. What? So the missing people were all captured by him. Virus experiment? What virus experiment? And they're all dead? The crowd below immediately became restless. He expressed his disbelief at Yang Chao's actions, and at the same time, objected to Zhou Shihui's expulsion order. They killed so many people. Why should we let them go? Don't let them go. I want them to pay with their lives. Yes, Leader Zhou. We can't let them go. We should kill this lunatic, Yang Chao. He actually dared to use living people for experiments. His crime is unforgivable. At this moment, Zhou Shui said, "Don't worry. We don't intend to let the culprit, Yang Chao, escape. You just have to see what Leader Wu is capable of." Yang Chao stood in midair and sneered. "Want to catch me? Do you have that ability?" As he spoke, he suddenly waved his hand in the direction of the people on the ground. Whoosh, whoosh. A gust of level 10 wind immediately swept towards these people's location. "Ah, quick, quick, hold him. Quick, hide." The people on the ground immediately couldn't be bothered to watch the commotion, and when the wind blew, they frantically looked for a place to hide. Some of them couldn't react in time and were immediately blown off the ground by the wind, flipping twice in midair before falling to the ground. Most of them were directly blown to the ground, and even rolled a few times. Boom! A few bolts of purple lightning immediately descended from the sky, instantly striking towards Yang Chao. Yang Chao's figure flashed, and very quickly, he flashed to another location. But before he could stop, a bolt of lightning struck him from the top of his head. On the top of the government building, Wu Qingyue's outstretched finger pointed at Yang Chao's figure as he moved. One after another, bolts of lightning as thick as an arm chased after Yang Chao, and one after another dodged above Yang Chao's head. However, Yang Chao was of the wind attribute, and although his attack power was slightly weaker than Wu Qingyue's, but his dodging ability was top-notch. After dodging a few times, he still didn't let Wu Qingyue's lightning touch him. Is this all a lightning ability user can do? Yang Chao was still in the mood to mock Wu Qingyue while dodging. His voice was transmitted far away through the control of the energy in his body. Wu Qingyue used his slender fingers with distinct joints to point left and right at Yang Chao. Wherever his finger pointed, lightning would descend. After hearing Yang Chao's words, he smiled faintly and said, "Do you want to see the power of the lightning attribute? Then I'll let you have your wish." As he spoke, he suddenly opened all his fingers. He clenched his fist into the shape of a claw and brought it down. Then, the light above Yang Chao's head dimmed, and the black clouds above suddenly pressed down. Streaks of concentrated lightning struck down at the same time, like a thunderstorm falling from above Yang Chao's head. By the time Yang Chao looked up and realized the situation, it was already too late. Although the thunderstorm did not cover a large area, it still covered an area of 20 meters. Moreover, it was extremely fast, so no matter how fast he was, it was impossible for him to immediately escape from this position. Rumble. Yang Chao desperately used his wind ability to surround himself, and then quickly moved away. He did not expect that when he moved, the dense lightning would move with him. Therefore, Yang Chao was soon enveloped by bolts of lightning, and then he was blasted down from the sky. On the other side, when Tang Yi saw that Yang Chao had no chance of winning, he suddenly turned around and retreated. "Stop right there. Do you want to run?" Zhou Shui stared at him. He immediately chased after them. Although Yang Chao fell to the ground, he did not suffer any serious injuries. Because there was still a layer of wind protecting him, Yang Chao, who fell to the ground, happened to see Tang Yi retreating. "What kind of helper did you find?" He immediately ran away when he saw that the situation wasn't right. "What a good eye." Wu Qingyue directly jumped down from the roof and stood on a telephone pole next to Yang Chao. He smiled faintly. Chapter 362. Yang Chao already had a bad premonition when he saw Tang Yi escaping. Now that he heard Wu Qingyue's words, his face immediately turned gloomy. But before he had the mood to care about Tang Yi, a thick bolt of lightning descended from the sky and struck him. This bolt of lightning was as thick as a house beam, and it seemed to have a mind of its own as it rushed towards Yang Chao's head. Yang Chao's heart skipped a beat as he felt a chill down his spine. In an instant, a sense of crisis arose spontaneously. He quickly dodged, but just as he dodged, the bolt of lightning also changed direction. It made a turn in midair and chased after him. Moreover, the speed of this bolt of lightning was more than 10 times faster than before. In the blink of an eye, it caught up to Yang Chao. Then, with a boom, it directly exploded on Yang Chao's back. "Ah!" Plop! Yang Chao screamed as he was directly blown to the ground. This time, although his wind element helped him block most of the lightning force that exploded on his body was also very terrifying. Yang Chao rolled on the ground before he trembled as he climbed up from the ground. His black military robe had been blown to tatters, and his face was also charred. This was the difference in strength between him and Wu Qingyue, even if they were experts of the same level. Even if they were powerhouses of the same level, the destructive power of his wind element and Wu Qingyue's lightning force wasn't on the same level. Just as he got up, he suddenly raised his head, only to see another thick bolt of lightning coming down from above. Boom! Yang Chao didn't even have time to react this time and was directly bombarded again. Wu Qingyue's lightning blasted away more than half of the energy in his body, and the remaining energy was uncontrollably jumping around in his body. This experiment of yours, you and your subordinates, isn't enough to repay the lives of those who died because of you. Wu Qingyue's indifferent voice came over. It was rare for him to be so cold after he finished speaking. Usually, he would have a faint smile and his voice would be gentle. Today, although the smile on his face was still hanging on the corner of his mouth, his eyes were cold. Ha. Want to kill me? Do you think it's that easy? Yang Chao was like a humanoid charcoal that was blasted black as he stood up shakily. His face suddenly twisted as he laughed out loud. He opened his mouth wide and bared his teeth. The shape of his mouth began to crack in a strange manner. Then the bones on his body began to creak. His body began to slowly deform. Roar! A pool of saliva flowed out from Yang Chao's gaping mouth. His eyes were still clear, but with a hint of madness. He roared at Wu Qingyue. "Let me show you the results of my experiment." Ha. Wu Qingyue looked at Yang Chao, whose body and bones had mutated into a monster that was neither human nor monster. He could not help but cover his eyes and say, "I say, you've become so ugly that I really don't want to fight you. What an eyesore." As he spoke, he suddenly swiped his finger down in Yang Chao's direction, and another bolt of lightning fell. Boom! The lightning fell, but just as it was about to hit Yang Chao suddenly dodged Wu Qingyue's lightning. Then, he leaped onto the wall next to him and climbed up like a spider. Boom! Another clap of thunder. A bolt of purple lightning struck toward Yang Chao, who was crawling on the wall. The people hiding downstairs looked at Yang Chao with a dumbfounded expression when they saw him become like this. How did he become like this? What kind of monster is this? The bones on Yang Chao's back had become huge protrusions, and his back was bent like a bow. His arms had become thicker than his thighs, and his fingers had become curved claws. His legs were strangely bent into an O shape, and his whole body was crawling on the ground. Yang Chao quickly crawled on the wall and quickly leaped to the other side. He's ready to escape? Are you still not going to act? Xiao Yunlong stood behind Wu Qingyue and asked. Wu Qingyue waved his hand, and several bolts of lightning fell from the sky. They struck toward Yang Chao, who was about to turn into the other side of the wall, but he cleverly avoided them. Look, his dodging ability has improved a lot, and I guess he may be immune to energy attacks. Wu Qingyue stared at Yang Chao and said. He suddenly turned to the other side in a flash and disappeared from sight. Wu Qingyue hurriedly leaped out from the top of the government building and flew toward Yang Chao's building. Xiao Yunlong looked at his figure that left in an instant and curiously followed. Even a level 7 arcanist would not be able to float in the air. Wind ability users were special because they had the support of the wind. That was why only wind-type metahumans could fly. Wu Qingyue leaped to the top of the building on the other side and chased after Yang Chao, who was dodging, and released several bolts of lightning. Although these bolts of lightning had successfully exploded on Yang Chao's body, it was just like what he said. There was no effect. Yang Chao, who was struck by lightning a few times, was still scurrying around along the wall without any effect. Xiao Yunlong followed and said in surprise when he saw the situation, Hey, it seems like there's really no reaction to your attacks. He raised his hand and waved in Yang Chao's direction, and a large number of metal objects turned into sharp shapes, appearing out of thin air around Yang Chao. Then he shot toward Yang Chao for a while. Roar! Yang Chao dodged in panic, but there were still some sharp metal objects that pierced his body. It made him howl in pain, and his movements also paused a few times. He quickly slowed down. It seems that only physical attacks can have an effect on him. Xiao Yunlong retracted his hand and said. Wu Qingyue nodded and did not say anything more and chased after Yang Chao again. Yang Chao was no longer in the mood to continue fighting, so he was fleeing for his life. On the other side, Lin Xiao, who was playing with Tiny Tot in the room, suddenly seemed to have sensed something. She turned her head and looked at the window where the few people were still lying, and her eyes looked far away in the direction of the inner district. But she quickly turned back, and suddenly her eyes swept across the room that Lin Wenwen had just entered. Lin Xiao thought for a moment and said, Qing Qing, go in and see what's wrong with Wenwen? Did I go too far with my words just now? Long Qingying silently looked at her for a few seconds, and suddenly said, she couldn't have gone to get a haircut, right? Lin Xiao looked at her with a face full of suspicion, and then said, impossible. She treasures her hair so much. How could she bear to cut it off? Long Qingying slightly bowed her head and thought for a moment, but said, no, you're not wrong. But I feel that she's a little strange these 2 days. As she spoke, she looked up at the others and saw that they all nodded at her with a little agreement. Then I'll go take a look. With that, she turned and walked toward the bedroom. Chapter 363. Lin Xiao looked back at Yuan Tianxing and asked. She said Wenwen has been weird these days. What's going on? Yuan Tianxing also shook his head in confusion, indicating that he didn't know what she was thinking. Women's minds were the hardest to understand. They could be gloomy one moment and stormy the next. Who knew? Yuanxing's eyes were a bit strange, and he quickly turned his head to look out the window. He felt that he shouldn't say anything about Lin when asking about her. He didn't want this zombie lady to misunderstand something. That would be terrible. Long Qingying knocked on the door before pushing it open. When she went in, she saw Lin Wenwen sitting in front of the dresser, cutting her hair with a pair of scissors. At this time, Lin Wenwen's beautiful long black hair had been cut off by her. Long Qingying widened her eyes in disbelief and said, You really cut it off? What were you thinking? She felt that Lin Wenwen wouldn't really listen to Lin Xiao, right? Lin Wenwen turned around and sighed. I don't want to trouble you guys, so I want to change as much as I can. Qing Qing, come here. I can't cut the back, you help me. Long Qingying walked over to her in bewilderment, still looking at her in disbelief. What's with that look? You guys are the ones who think I don't know how to protect myself, okay? You guys say that wearing a dress will cause people to commit crimes, but I don't wear it anymore, right? Long hair is a hindrance, so I'll cut it now, okay? Also, I want to learn physical skills from you, so you have to be responsible for teaching me. Lin Wenwen rolled her eyes and handed the scissors to her. Long Qingying took the scissors and protested. Huh? Why do I have to be responsible for teaching you? Can't you find someone else? Lin Wenwen looked up at her and asked, Then tell me, who is more suitable to teach me? Long Qingying looked at her and said, You can ask Sister Wang Xue to teach you. Her physical skills are also very good. Moreover, her ability is a physical type. Lin Wenwen rolled his eyes at her again and said, You also said that my sister-in-law has a physical ability. She can destroy a wall with one kick. Okay, you wanted to teach me? Do you want her to cripple me? Can't you just let me learn the basics from you, and then find her to teach me? Long Qingying looked at her speechlessly and felt that she was right. Cheng Wangshue's ability was physical. Her physical strength was at least 5 times that of a normal person. Now that she was level 5, it would be easy for her to beat up 10 normal men. Not to mention beating up the delicate Miss Lin Wenwen. If he wanted to train his body, there was nothing faster than getting beaten up. This was the best way to stimulate his abilities. Long Qingying looked at her face, raised her eyebrows, and said suspiciously, All right, you need to train your body first. At least improve your stamina before you can practice combat. Are you really going to do this? You're not just joking, are you? Or would he stop after 2 days? I don't have time to play with you. Lin Wenwen chuckled and said, You're looking down on me. I'll make you drop your glasses. Long Qingying took a pair of scissors and cut the air a few times. She said expressionlessly, Sorry, I'm not wearing my glasses. Lin Wenwen shrugged his shoulders, turned his back to her, and said, Then you should support your chin. Lin Xiao, who had faintly heard their conversation in the room, had a strange expression on her face. She looked at the others, thought for a moment, and didn't say anything. But in her heart, she thought that Long Qingying was right. Lin Wenwen was a little strange now. She cut her hair. She was actually willing to cut her hair. She had kept her hair for more than 10 years, and she wouldn't cut it no matter how many times she asked her to. Now she had thought it through. Also, what the hell was physical training? She had a delicate body that couldn't even walk 5 meters with half a bucket of water. And now she wanted to learn physical combat? Wouldn't she be screaming after getting hit a few times? Was her sister transmigrated by someone else? Because she had transmigrated someone else. Listening to the continuous roar of thunder from the inner district outside the window, and the situation was getting more and more intense. Yuan Tianqing said, Leader Wu's lightning ability is really powerful, but why is it so powerful now? You haven't taken care of that Yang Chao yet? Isn't he a wind ability user? Other than being good at dodging skills, his defense and attack aren't strong. Du Yuanqing nodded and said in agreement, yes. They've been fighting for half an hour, and it seems like their positions are getting more and more off. Looks like that Yang Chao is preparing to run. Yuan Tianqing crossed his arms in front of his chest and said, Leader Wu probably won't let him run. At this time, Lin Xiao said, That's not necessarily true. I don't know what method that Yang Chao used, but his entire aura seems to have changed. If Wu Qingyue is too arrogant, he might regret it. But he has been preparing for so long. He probably won't be careless and let Yang Chao escape. That would be too humiliating. Yuan Tianqing looked back at her and said, What do you feel? Lin Xiao shook her head and said, Just some faint aura changes. With that, she stood up and walked to the window. She closed her eyes and sniffed outside. She opened her eyes and said, His body is infected with a virus, and he should have used his ability to suppress it. Now he seems to have released the virus in his body, and he has become a body that is neither human nor zombie. If I'm not wrong, his appearance might have changed. This was just a vague premonition of hers, but she wasn't sure if it was true. Not long after, the door to Lin Wenwen's room suddenly opened. Lin Xiao and the others immediately turned to look and saw a young woman with short hair walking out. Lin Wenwen walked out with a head of coarsely cut short hair that reached her ears. Her entire temperament had changed. The originally quiet and elegant feeling had suddenly become neat and clean. That beautiful doll-like face had a faint smile, and there was a faint sense of cuteness that was different from before. Also, there was a flash of determination in her eyes. Long Qingying, who was behind her, looked at the reactions of Yuan Tianxing and the others with interest. Because Lin Xiao had heard the conversation between the two of them in the room, she already had a premonition in her heart. So now that she saw her sister's change in appearance, she at most felt that it was a little strange. Also, her sister's short hair didn't seem that ugly. It was all thanks to her baby face. It was just that the style of her hair was a little rough, and it lowered the beauty by a lot. Yuan Tianxing and Du Yuanxing were both stunned at this time and looked at Lin Wenwen with a strange expression. Their eyes were filled with surprise, novelty, confusion, and so on. Du Yuanxing couldn't help but say, You. What happened to you? Lin Wenwen was originally a little uncomfortable with her own style, but when she heard Du Yuanxing's words, she glared at him in annoyance. You're the one who was shocked. Didn't you guys tell me to cut my hair? Chapter 364. Yuan Tianxing and Du Yuanxing immediately looked at Lin Xiao, meaning to say, She said it has nothing to do with us. Lin Xiao looked at her and said, I told you to cut it, so you cut it. Why do you listen to me so much? Haven't you thought about cutting it yourself? Your hair is so long. Someone must have asked you to cut it before. Lin Wenwen awkwardly touched the short hair beside his ear and said, It was because the environment in the past wasn't as bad as it is now. Besides, even if I don't cut it, you guys will still despise me and that part of mine. Even if you cut it off, we would still despise it, the others said in their hearts. Lin Wenwen seemed to have sensed their gazes and asked, Look at your eyes. Even if I cut my hair, you guys will also despise me. Well, even if I cut my hair, it won't change anything. Long Qingying said expressionlessly, Even if you want to change, you don't have to cut your hair. Lin Wenwen said, No, it's convenient and easy to wash. And it will also save water. Isn't that even better? Long Qingying looked at her silently. Lin Xiao said, Suit yourself. But it's hard for you to cut your hair, which means that something has changed in your heart. Do as you see fit. Lin Wenwen looked at her and nodded. Then he walked to the window and looked in the direction of the black clouds that occasionally brought with it the sound of thunder. He asked, All right, when will the war stop? Won't they suffer a lot if they fight like this in the base? Yuan Tianxing said, There will definitely be losses, but whether it's big or not, it's not a big deal for them. It shouldn't be too big. Just as Lin Xiao was about to stand up and walk to the window to see what was going on, he suddenly felt a strange movement in the space. Her expression faltered for a moment before she disappeared from the sofa in a flash. After an afternoon and a night of energy absorption, Little Man finally had some movement. Lin Xiao appeared on the shore of the lake and looked at the surging waves of the lake. But this time the lake didn't rise. Instead, the energy in the water became denser. Perhaps because of the movement in the water, Lin Xiao looked back and found that Shun Yuzhen had hidden in a subspace. The zombie dog on the other side of the forest was also quietly lying down, not daring to move. The waves slowly calmed down. Lin Xiao thought that Little Man would stretch out her countless rattan tentacles. However, after waiting for a while, the familiar rattan did not emerge from the water. At that moment, she saw something in the water swimming towards the lake where she was standing. That vague shape. Why does it look like an octopus? Lin Xiao stared at the unknown object with widened eyes. It was swimming towards him with its short tentacles. As they got closer, Lin Xiao's expression became strange. There was surprise, delight, doubt, curiosity, and anticipation. That's right, the aura of the thing that was swimming towards her was Little Man. And from the looks of it, Little Man had already broken free from the situation of being fixed at the bottom of the lake and could run around on her own. Would she be able to come ashore? And why did it become smaller? The previous few times, it had clearly changed drastically. Lin Xiao watched as the white object swam closer and closer in the water. He watched as she emerged from the water. He couldn't help but laugh. That's right, this jade-white color was Little Man's original color. But this shape was a bit. There were a lot of vines on her head, but they were shortened to about 1 meter long. They were all hanging softly behind her white and chubby body. Little Man's face, neck, and stomach were all connected together. Because Lin Xiao couldn't see her stomach, She could only see her face, two big green eyes, a small nose, and no mouth. Her head and stomach were actually like a big carrot. The two ends were slightly smaller, while the stomach in the middle was big and fat. Below were several thick white roots. Little Man blinked her pair of big, watery green eyes. A few thick root legs propped up, and then she happily ran towards Lin Xiao. But just after she ran 2 steps, a few of her little roots mixed together. Then the child instantly fell to the ground, rolled twice, and then looked at the direction of the lake and rolled back. Little Man, is that you? Lin Xiao knew that it was Little Man, but she still couldn't help but call out to her in amusement. Little Man rolled twice in the lake before sitting up. Then she continued to climb out of the water, and then continued to swing her legs to run towards Lin Xiao. In the end, she fell again with a plop sound. Lin Xiao looked at her confused big eyes and found it funny as he walked down. Then he bent down to hold her big belly and carried her up and found that she wasn't very heavy. Mama, Little Man can come up and play ha ha ha. As soon as he picked up Little Man, Lin Xiao's mind rang with Little Man's familiar tone. Lin Xiao hugged her and found that this child's body wasn't hard but felt like a sponge. Soft, bouncy, and very heavy. Little Man, why are you so heavy? Lin Xiao couldn't help but say. If she didn't have great strength after turning into a zombie, this little guy weighed at least 100 kilograms, and she definitely couldn't carry it. Little Man didn't have hands, but her hair that was as thick as a baby's finger and her legs that were as thick as an adult's thumb were swinging together. She happily sent a message to Lin Xiao. Mama, this isn't Little Man's original form. Little Man can still become bigger. Mama, can you bring Tiny Tot into play now? Little Man felt her breath outside. Lin Xiao curiously asked her, why did you let her in? Can't you go out with me now? Little Man wanted to shake her head, but found that her whole body was shaking. She almost fell from Lin Xiao's hand, so she had to stop. She swung her hair and said, no, Little Man can't go out and touch the air outside. The air outside will make it impossible for Little Man to survive. Lin Xiao was startled. She almost wanted to directly bring Little Man out. She didn't expect there would be such a problem. She curiously asked, why? Little Man said, Little Man can only survive in here by absorbing the lake water and the clean air here. And Mama, Little Man hasn't finished evolving yet. I'm about to enter the second stage of absorption, but I need to be with Mama. Lin Xiao nodded and said, clean air? Are you saying that the space outside isn't clean? Little Man twisted the vines in her hair and replied, yes, the air outside will corrode Little Man's white body. Little Man won't go out. Lin Xiao asked, then how can you get out? Do I have to reach level 5? Haven't you reached level 4 yet? Little Man replied, it hasn't arrived yet. Mama, quickly go out and bring Tiny Tot in. Little Man wants to play with her. By the way, Mama, quickly go and find someone you like. I want a man. Chapter 365. Lin Xiao looked down at her with a confused face and asked curiously, what man? Why do you want to find a man? Tell me what's going on first. Hearing her question, Little Man replied, yes, it's the person you like. He's also here to help Little Man level up together. Mama has to come with a human of a different gender, or Mama. You don't have to find the person you like. You can also find someone else. Not knowing why Little Man's words. Lin Xiao had a bad feeling. You mean this time, besides me, we have to find another person to come in and go into the lake together? Yes, Little Man answered. And then? Lin Xiao asked. And then? What then? Little Man asked her in confusion. Then we go down together. How can we help you level up? Lin Xiao asked her curiously. Little Man doesn't know. Little Man will know what to do when the time comes. Little Man didn't give her an accurate answer. This made Lin Xiao feel very strange. Why did she have to find a man to come in? That meant she and that man had to go into the water together and then face each other naked? It really didn't feel good. What did Little Man want to do? Mama, Little Man wants Tiny Tot. Quickly let Tiny Tot into play. At this time, Little Man really wanted Lin Xiao to bring Tiny Tot into play and didn't seem to care about other things for the time being. Lin Xiao looked at her strange look and said, "Now that you look like this, will you scare Tiny Tot?" Little Man Man swung the vines on her head around and replied, "No, no, last time, Little Man Man told her that Little Man Man can transform." Lin Xiao looked at her speechlessly. She didn't think that this guy had already hinted to Tiny Tot last time. "Okay then, wait for me." Lin Xiao carried her to the sofa in front of the small space and prepared to go out and bring Tiny Tot into play. But when she saw her appearance, Lin Xiao suddenly stopped. "Huh, are you cold like this? Do you want me to give you some clothes to wrap you up?" Little Man sat on the sofa, swinging her little legs and hair as she replied, "I'm not cold." "All right then, just you wait." Lin Xiao stood up, turned around, and left the space. As soon as Lin Xiao left the space, everyone looked at her. He only saw her carrying Xiao Budian and the gray rabbit in Xiao Budian's arms before disappearing in a flash. "What's wrong with her?" Du Yuanqing asked. Yuan Tianqing shook his head. "How would I know?" Du Yuanqing said, she brought the little princess inside. What if Leader Wu doesn't see the little princess when he comes to pick her up?" Yuan Tianqing looked at him with a smile and said, "What do you want to do? You can just say that you were brought into the space by Miss Lu." Du Yuanqing. "Oh." Long Qingying glanced at him and said, "Why are you thinking so much? Miss Lu won't do anything to the little princess. What are you worried about?" Why did she only realize now that this Du Yuanqing's brain was sometimes missing something? The last time he went on a mission, he looked quite normal. After Lin Xiao brought Xiao Budian in, she put her on the sofa. She pointed to Little Man next to her and asked, "Do you still know her?" Xiao Budian was already used to being brought in and out of the space by Lin Xiao. After being brought in by Lin Xiao, she naturally wanted to look towards the lake. However, when she suddenly heard Lin Xiao's words, she turned around and saw a pair of big eyes looking at her. Wu Yueling's eyes suddenly lit up, and she quickly slid down from the sofa. Then she leaned towards Little Man. Little Man sat there motionlessly, just swinging her little legs. Then when Wu Yueling came closer, she put her hair on Xiao Budian's hand. Then the two little guys looked at each other and smiled. Xiao Budian's face rarely showed any expression, but now Lin Xiao found that the expression on her face had already changed a lot. Especially when she stayed with herself, Little Man, or the gray rabbit, her body was always brimming with a very happy mood. Lin Xiao knew that Wu Yueling liked Little Man very much, because she had already seen the smile on Wu Yueling's face unconsciously. She didn't know whether she had noticed it or not. She asked, "Xiao Budian, when can you talk to us?" Lin Xiao felt that the child's autism seemed to have improved a lot. Or was it because the child only accepted her and Little Man in her heart? Xiao Budian looked back at Lin Xiao and just opened her little mouth. But she didn't make a sound, and then turned back to play with Little Man. Little Man pulled her to sit on the sofa next to her with Ratan. And then the two little guys didn't know what they were discussing. At least Lin Xiao felt that these two little guys were discussing something very important. The gray rabbit seemed to feel that no one was playing with it, and it was very familiar with the atmosphere and the environment here. It immediately jumped from Xiao Budian's side to the strawberry field. It had eaten cabbages for many days, and it wanted to eat the vegetables here. The food outside was so bad. What Lin Xiao didn't know was that the two little guys were discussing, "Little Man, I want to find a man for Mama," Xiao Budian. "I also want to find a wife for Papa." Little Man looked at Xiao Budian in surprise and asked, then what do you think of my mama? Do you like it?" Xiao Budian nodded and said with some confusion, "Zombie sister is very good. I like it, but I don't know if Papa will like it." Little Man narrowed her big green eyes and said, "Bring your Papa here, and let me see. I will make him like my mama." Saying that, Little Man suddenly smiled mischievously. Xiao Budian looked at her blankly with a pair of bright black eyes. "Really? How can I make Papa like sister?" Little Man said to her, "You have to call her Mama. I have my own way." Xiao Budian looked at her with some hesitation, and then reluctantly nodded. On the other side, Lin Xiao still didn't know that after she brought Xiao Budian in, she was immediately sold to Xiao Budian by Little Man. And on the other side, Wu Qingyue, who was happily chasing Yang Chao with Xiao Yunlong, also didn't know that he had been sold by his precious daughter to a little naughty little vine. At this time, he and Xiao Yunlong had chased Yang Chao from the inner area to the outer area. Yang Chao's movement speed after transforming was very fast, and he chose to walk in crowded or narrow places. This greatly hindered Wu Qingyue and Xiao Yunlong's attack. Roar he, come at me. If you have the ability, then blow up this entire building. Otherwise, what can you do to me? Yang Chao laughed at Wu Qingyue and the other two as he entered a residential building. Soon there were bursts of screams of fright in the building, which soon turned into screams. Chapter 366. Wu Qingyue rushed over with Xiao Yunlong, listening to the noise in the building with a bad expression. He's starting to eat people, Wu Qingyue said, and immediately rushed into the building in a flash. He knew that these virus-infected psychics, as long as they break through their own energy suppression, they will become like this monster. At the same time, their internal organs and digestive system will also change. They have lost interest in the food of ordinary people and began to feel hungry for the flesh and blood of living people. When Wu Qingyue and Xiao Yunlong rushed into the corridor, they saw that the ground and walls of the corridor were indeed splashed with a lot of fresh blood. The two of them had a bad feeling and immediately quickened their pace to chase up. At this time, Yang Chao's mouth was wide open. He was biting the back of a woman's neck, dragging her body on all fours and quickly leaping up. The woman's body was flung like a rag by his leaping movements, her body from time to time smashing into the corner of the wall. But she could no longer cry out in pain because there was no breath in her nose. Yang Chao bit the back of her neck. His big mouth was dripping with blood. After he dragged the woman up, he seemed to feel that Wu Qingyue and Xiao Yunlong would not come up so quickly. He found an illusion and dragged the woman over, then began to tear her clothes with his hands. Very quickly, he tore the woman's clothes. After Yang Chao tore the woman's clothes, his deformed hands kneaded the woman's chest. Suddenly, he fiercely dug and tore off the woman's 2 white breasts. Then he took the meatball in his hand and stuffed it into his mouth and chewed. His claws and teeth were dyed red with blood. He chewed the 2 meatballs in a few bites, then suddenly turned his head and stared in the direction of the stairs. Then he suddenly turned around and ran. Just as he ran less than 2 meters away, a wall suddenly stretched out from the wall next to him, blocking his way. But Yang Chao did not care. He just stopped for a moment, then waved his arm and punched the wall. Originally, with his current strength, he could directly punch a hole in an ordinary wall. However, the wall in front of him was different. After being punched by him, there was not even a crack on the wall. You actually dare to eat people in the base. Yang Chao, you really are a deranged lunatic. Zhou Shihui's voice rang out. Roar. Yang Chao turned his head and wanted to run to the back, but he soon realized that the back was also blocked. He spun around on the spot and laughed in a twisted manner. The 2 pieces of meat on a woman's chest are the most delicious. You guys can also go have a taste, ha 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 ha. But before he could finish, a large number of steel rods suddenly shot out from the surrounding walls, heading straight for Yang Chao. Yang Chao darted around in the narrow space, but he did not completely avoid the attacks of the iron rods. His body was pierced by several meter-long steel rods that were as thick as fingers. Roar! He roared anxiously, then stopped and used both hands to grab the steel rod on his body and pulled it out forcefully. Soon, the steel rod was pulled out with blood staining it. Suddenly, when he turned his head to grab another one, a steel rod suddenly shot through his head. Yang Chao's entire body was frozen in the same position as he pulled out the steel essence from his body. Then his eyes widened, and he slowly collapsed. The 2 extra walls slowly receded, and then Wu Qingyue, Zhou Shihui, Xiao Yunlong, and the others all stood on the other side of the wall. Looking at Yang Chao, who had fallen to the ground with a hole in his head, they walked over. Xiao Yunlong was the first to step forward and cautiously kicked Yang Chao's body. After confirming that the guy was dead, he turned to the others and said, "He's dead. But before he died, he harmed a woman. What should we do with this guy now?" Wu Qingyue looked at Zhou Shihui and said, "Old Zhou, go and arrest all the other accomplices first. I will appease the people." Zhou Shui nodded, glanced at Yang Chao's body, and turned to leave with a sigh of relief. Wu Qingyue said to Xiao Yunlong, "Cut off his head." Xiao Yunlong waved his hand, and all the steel here floated up and then gathered together. Then it melted and formed a ball. He controlled the metal ball in the air with one hand, while the other hand moved left and right at the metal ball. With his action, the metal ball in front of him was pulled into a sharp blade shape, and the blade flashed a sharp light. Xiao Yunlong pressed down with both hands, and the metal steel blade slashed at Yang Chao's neck with a clang. His head was directly cut off, and a stream of blood gushed out from the cut. Wu Qingyue went to the side of the female corpse and examined the appearance of the female corpse. She has been infected, although I don't know if she will turn into a zombie. Take care of the body first, keep it to observe the situation later. Yes. At this time, Xiao Yunlong pointed to Yang Chao's head and asked, "Do you want to take out the crystal nucleus inside?" Wu Qingyue nodded and said, "Take it out. No matter what, he is a 7th level psychic." Xiao Yunlong controlled the steel blade to cut at Yang Chao's head again, and then picked up a piece of steel next to him and stirred it twice in Yang Chao's skull. A crystal nucleus fell out. He picked it up and wiped it on Yang Chao's tattered military uniform, then stood up and handed it to Wu Qingyue. "You keep it, you killed him. The crystal nucleus, of course, belongs to you." Wu Qingyue did not take it, and after saying a few words, he turned and left, bring down the two bodies. Yes. The surrounding soldiers immediately responded, because they knew that a victim was attacked and taken away by Yang Chao. When they came up, they had prepared white cloth and a shelf. They covered the female corpse with a white cloth and tied her body with a rope. Only then did everyone carry the two corpses downstairs. Xiao Yunlong took the crystal nucleus and glanced at Yang Chao's headless body on the ground, then followed Wu Qingyue down. Wu Qingyue assigned some tasks to Xiao Yunlong to deal with the aftermath as he went downstairs, and then began to appease the panicking people downstairs. At the moment of Yang Chao's death, if Lin Xiao was outside the space, she would certainly be aware. But at this time, she was still in the space, teaching Little Man to walk. That's right, teaching her to walk. Because Little Man had 6 legs, each of which was as thick as Lin Xiao's thumb, and half a meter long. It was white and tender and looked very cute. But as soon as she stepped on the ground, she did not know how to control her little legs. She could clearly control the mop of hair on her head strand by strand, but she could not control her own roots. When she walked, she did not know which leg to step on first, and then she took 2 or 3 steps at the same time, but the direction was not the same. So the result was that they got tangled together and then twisted into a ball. Then, Little Man fell down with a paw sound. Chapter 367. Lin Xiao and the little guy silently squatted on the ground and looked at the little man who was lying on the ground and unwilling to get up. "Little man, why can you control your hair but not your legs?" Lin Xiao didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he looked at her. The little man flipped over on the ground and then twisted the vines on her head and her little legs to the side. She put one of the vines on her head on Lin Xiao's hand. Because the little man's legs are roots, this is something that only knows how to stick in the ground and not move. Lin Xiao glanced at the little guy, then turned around and said to the little man, "Even the little guy runs faster than you. Quickly stand up." The little man rolled on the ground twice before using the vines on her head to stand up. The little guy looked at her swaying appearance and wanted to go over and help her up. However, he was stopped by Lin Xiao. "Don't go, in case she crushes you when she falls down. She's very heavy and will injure you." Lin Xiao looked at the little guy and said. The little guy hesitantly looked at the little man, then looked at Lin Xiao with a very conflicted expression. The little guy stood very steadily, but he wanted her to take 2 steps. First extend one leg, support it, then extend the other. Don't rush, slowly. Extend the second leg, third leg, and yes, just like this. Walk slowly. After teaching for an entire hour, the little man slowly walked. However, she couldn't run because if she ran, her 6 legs would twist together and fall. Shen Yuzhen hid by the door in the small space and peeked her head out. She curiously watched Lin Xiao teach the little man how to walk. She really wanted to come out, but she was very afraid of the little man's aura, so she could only hide there and watch. At the same time, Xin Yuzhen was also very curious as to why little Princess Wu Yueling was also here. Seeing the expression on Wu Yueling's face as she ran around the little man with a slight smile, Xin Yubiao felt even more strange. Wasn't Wu Yueling an autistic child? Why did she look like a normal child now, able to play with others? This was because she heard the little guy quietly tell her that Wu Cheng would come to pick her up soon. While waiting, little man was learning how to walk from Lin Xiao. Little man could now sense all the auras outside the space through Lin Xiao eye. Although the range was not very far, she could only sense all the auras and movements within 100 meters. She couldn't see what they looked like, but she could distinguish between good and bad auras. Therefore, she was not lying when she told Lin Xiao that she could not leave the space. However, there was one thing that she was hiding from Lin Xiao. Although her body couldn't go out, she still had one more thing to hide. But in fact, her vine tentacles could quietly stretch out. But the premise was that she had to grab Lin Xiao's hand and touch her body. Hence, Yuan Tianxing and the rest who were outside the house were dumbfounded as they looked at the jade-white vine branches that had grown out of nowhere. It was wandering around the house, although it didn't have any intention of attacking them. But why does this vine look so familiar? Where did this come from? The few of them sat on the sofa and stared blankly at the vines, touching them left and right. Then he stretched out his hand and looked around them. At this moment, the door was suddenly pushed open. Xinglu walked in and said excitedly, "The news is back." What is this?" Yuan Tianxing shook his head in confusion and said, "I don't know. Don't attack it first. Let's see what it wants to do. It doesn't have any bad intentions." Lin Wenwen looked at Xinglu and the jade-white vine and asked, "What's the situation over there? Is Yang Chao dead?" Xinglu walked over carefully and saw the vine suddenly reaching towards him. He immediately stood still and stared at the vine while answering Lin Wenwen's question. "Dead. I heard that he seemed to have turned into some ugly monster. Even Chief Wu's lightning attack couldn't do any harm to him. In the end, he was killed by another leader in the base and Deputy Leader Xiao." As he spoke, he looked at Lin Wenwen's short hair curiously and suddenly felt that he couldn't get used to it. But he didn't say it out loud. Everyone stared at the vine and asked Xinglu, "He can transform?" Little Man stealthily searched around the room and then retracted her vine tentacles. Soon, it disappeared in front of Yuan Tianxing and the others. Everyone watched as the vines turned transparent piece by piece and then disappeared. Then they breathed a sigh of relief. Du Yuanxing asked, "Is it gone?" Everyone else, "Probably." Du Yuanxing thought for a moment and suddenly said in confusion, "This looks like the vine in the lake in Miss Lu's space." Long Qingying and Lin Wenwen both had a flash of inspiration when he said that. Yuan Tianxing had never seen Little Man's appearance before, so he looked at Du Yuanxing blankly. Xinglu looked around suspiciously. After making sure that there were no strange white vines around, he felt a chill down his spine. Then he breathed a sigh of relief. He said to everyone, "I heard that Yang Chao was secretly doing some zombie virus experiments, and he was using living people in the base to do it. Hundreds of people went missing in the base in the past few months, and now they've all been found. They were all captured by him." Yuan Tianxing and the others looked at him in shock. Lin Wenwen said angrily, "You said he used living people for experiments? What experiments? And secretly capturing people. It can't be anything good." Xinglu nodded and replied, "Yes, that experiment seems to be to extract the zombie virus from the blood of zombies and then dilute it. Then inject it into people's bodies. Ordinary people will die directly, and only psychics can suppress the virus." Yuan Tianxing frowned and asked, "Why did he dilute the virus and inject it into people's bodies?" Xinglu said, "It seems that he wants to gain some power. Look at Yang Chao turning into that monster. He's not even afraid of lightning anymore, so only physical attacks can be effective against him." Lin Wenwen thought for a moment and said, "So we can only attack him with weapons or machines. Then wouldn't it be enough to give him a bomb?" Xinglu nodded and said to her in agreement, "Yes, if there's a bomb, it can indeed do some damage to him. But he's moving too fast, and if we wanted to throw a bomb at him, he would have already run away. So in the end, Deputy Leader Xiao had to pierce his head with a metal to kill him. Yuan Tianqing remembered that Miss Lu also said that Yang Chao had a level 7 accomplice. So he asked, "What about Yang Chao's accomplice? Who is he?" Xingla looked at him and replied, "Oh, I heard that he's a level 7 metal psychic." But in the end, it seemed that the situation wasn't right. So he abandoned Yang Chao and ran away. Everyone exclaimed in surprise, "Ran away?" Chapter 368. Yuan Tianqing asked, "Isn't he Yang Chao's helper? Why didn't he help?" Xingla shook her head and said, "I don't know. Anyway, I heard that he ran away when Leader Wu and the others were besieging Yang Chao." Lin Wenwen's expression was strange. She didn't know whether to laugh and said, "Is Yang Chao going to die of anger?" Xingla said, "If it were me, I would definitely die of anger." Yuan Tianqing shook his head and said, "So what? Isn't Yang Chao's helper a robber? Robbers aren't trustworthy. This robber definitely won't take the risk for Yang Chao." Lin Wenwen said, "Maybe it's just that the reward isn't enough for the robber to take the risk." Yuan Tianqing looked at her and nodded. "You're right. Then Leader will be busy again. This matter in the base has a great impact on the people, and it's going to be winter soon." Du Yuanqing said with his arms crossed. Lin Wenwen suddenly said, "I found that ever since we met Sister Lu, our situation has been getting better. Now that we've received so many supplies, we don't have to worry about surviving the winter." When the others heard this, they also found that the base was being built smoothly, and Miss Lu did find a lot of supplies for them. After Lin Xiao taught Little Man to walk slowly in the space, she sat on the sofa and watched her play with Tiny Tot. Then she sensed outside and happened to hear the news that Xingla brought back. "I'll go out for a while. You two play. Little Man, don't fall and crush Tiny Tot. If she gets hurt, I'll come in and spank you." She looked at Little Man and said, then turned around and disappeared. She didn't worry about Little Man, because she knew that even if Little Man fell, she would fall in the direction where Tiny Tot wasn't. Little Man swung the vines, covering her head over and over again. After seeing Lin Xiao go out, she slowly dragged Tiny Tot to the sofa. Then she held the sofa and walked around it in circles. Her speed was comparable to that of a tortoise. Wu Yueling also quietly followed behind her, accompanying Little Man to walk around in circles. Little Man used a vine to pull Wu Yueling, then said to her, "Why hasn't your father come yet? I've been waiting for a long time." Wu Yueling looked at her blankly. She didn't say anything, but replied in her heart, "I don't know when Dad will come." Dad said he would come soon. Little Man sighed and said in an old-fashioned tone, "I wanted to find a random man for my mama, like the Uncle Yuan Tianqing outside. He's not bad, but you said you like my mama, so I have to give her to your father. But your father is so slow." Wu Yueling looked at her with confusion and asked, "If your mama leaves with another uncle, does that mean she can't be my mama anymore?" Little Man replied, "Of course, mama will have babies with other uncles, and then that will be me. Hee, don't tell your dad and my mom about this. This is our secret. We can't let them know." Wu Yueling looked at her with a confused expression. "Huh? Why will you become a baby? Then if I let my father come in, will he have babies with your mama?" Little Man blinked her eyes and smiled at her like 2 crescent moons. Naughtily, he said to her, "That's right, if your father comes in, then I'll let him and my mama have a baby. Then I'll become that baby. I'll call you elder sister. From now on, I'll be the younger sister." Although she didn't understand other words, she heard Little Man said she would become her younger sister. Wu Yueling's eyes suddenly lit up. Then she looked at Little Man in surprise. "Really? Really?" Little Man walked in front of her and turned around. No, turn around, because her head and body were one. She shook her rattan-shaped hair at Wu Yueling and said to her, "Really, really." Hearing this, Wu Yueling immediately became happy. Then, he suddenly opened his short arms and hugged her. Fortunately, although Little Man couldn't walk steadily, she was still able to run. Fortunately, although Little Man couldn't walk steadily, she could still stand steadily. Otherwise, she would definitely be pushed to the ground by Wu Yueling. Little Man said to her, you were so happy. Wu Yueling's cute little face was already smiling, and her two bright black eyes also became two small crescent moons. She nodded at her vigorously. Little Man suddenly thought, then if you didn't come today, I might let someone else be my father. Then I won't be your younger sister. But when she said this, Wu Yueling's expression froze for a moment. Then she looked at her blankly, as if thinking of what would happen if Little Man became someone else's younger sister. Thinking of this, she couldn't do it anymore. Immediately, her little red mouth pouted, and her eyes that were smiling into crescent moons immediately became tearful, looking at Little Man with red eyes. Seeing her expression, Little Man knew something was wrong in her heart. Oh no! Seeing Wu Yueling suddenly about to cry, Little Man's whole person, the whole vine felt bad. She hurriedly shook the vines on her head. Then her body swayed left and right like a roly-poly doll shaking its hair. She teased and coaxed her at the same time. All right, don't cry. When Mommy comes in and sees you crying, she will definitely spank my butt, although I don't know where my butt is. When Little Man said the butt, she was also at a loss for a moment. But soon, she didn't care about it, because she still had to coax her. Little Tot, look, aren't you here? Then I won't become someone else's little baby. Don't be scared. As a result, Wu Yueling's mouth pouted even more. She raised her little hand and began to wipe her tears that were falling down. But she looked like she was crying very sadly, but she didn't make a sound. She cried silently. Little Man felt bad all over. Oh my God, don't cry. What should I do, Mommy? Save me. After Lin Xiao went out, he had just talked with Yuan Tianxing and the others for a while. Then he heard Little Man's call. Lin Xiao was a little confused and didn't know what was going on, so he could only flash back in. As a result, he saw Wu Yueling crying and Little Man rolling on the ground in front of her. What are you guys doing? I've only been out for less than 3 minutes. Why is Tot crying? Little Man immediately got up from the ground, then stretched out the vines on her head and hooked onto Lin Xiao's hand. Then she hung onto Lin Xiao's arm and dragged herself in front of Lin Xiao. Then she hung onto her body. Mommy, Tot suddenly cried. Little Man also didn't know why she was crying. Was it because she missed her daddy? As she spoke, she turned her head and blinked at Wu Yueling. Although Wu Yueling was crying, she still remembered what Little Man said to her just now. She said that she couldn't let Big Sister Zombie know about that. She stopped crying slightly, then nodded at Lin Xiao with a pair of red-black eyes. She said that she missed her daddy. She missed her daddy. No problem. Chapter 369. Lin Xiao smiled at her helplessly and said, You've only been apart for a few hours and you already miss your father. No wonder he takes you with him every time he goes out to do a task. Not only do I have to be your nanny, but I also have to be your leader. How tiring. Wu Yueling didn't quite understand what she was saying, but she still managed to pick up on something else. That was, Lin Xiao was saying that her father was very tired. She knew what tiredness was. Tiredness was the feeling of doing a lot of things and then having no strength. That was what her father told her. If Big Sister Zombie helped her father work, wouldn't her father be too tired? She also liked Sister Zombie, and her father also said that he would find a mother for Ling Ling. Thinking about it, Wu Yueling suddenly rushed over and hugged Lin Xiao's thigh. Sister Zombie was her father's wife. She couldn't let others take her away. So Lin Xiao happened to sense Wu Yueling's thoughts from her touch, and her face darkened. What the hell? When did she become her father's wife? Children shouldn't talk nonsense. Lin Xiao quickly pulled Wu Yueling away and squatted down, then looked her in the eye and asked, Ling Ling, who told you that I am your father's wife? If you dare to say that to your father, he will definitely spank you. Hearing Lin Xiao's words, Little Man immediately froze. She thought to herself, oh no, Tiny Tot is still too young to keep a secret. But Wu Yueling just shook her head at Lin Xiao, then thought for a moment and nodded. Then, he rushed over and hugged Lin Xiao's arm, sticking tightly to it. So now the two little ones were stuck on both sides of Lin Xiao's arm. Lin Xiao. It seemed that something terrible had happened. Seeing that Tiny Tot was about to reveal the secret, Little Man was anxious and suddenly said to Lin Xiao, Mama, Little man can help you repair your body for the last time. Mama, go into the lake with little man. Lin Xiao didn't know that little man was trying to divert her attention. Hearing this, she immediately became interested. Is it okay? Didn't you say that you still need to find another person? Little man said, Mommy, you can't find that person for the time being, so you can go down by yourself. Lin Xiao didn't know that he was being tricked by this cunning little man. He asked hesitantly, Really? Don't you need anyone else? In fact, she secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Now she could find a man she liked. Where was she going to find it? However, she felt that little man's words were somewhat contradictory to her previous words, so she still asked suspiciously, You won't lie to me, right? Little man felt a little guilty, but she was very calm and didn't show it. Little man won't lie to Mommy. Then he replied in his heart, Anyway, if you don't want to find her yourself, then little man will help you find her. At that time, little man would hide in Mommy's stomach. Mommy wouldn't be able to hit little man anyway. Lin Xiao didn't know what she was planning. If he knew, he would probably vomit blood. She nodded to young man and said, All right then. Then she seemed to have thought of something. She turned her head and said to Wu Yueling, who was on her other arm, Tiny Tot, your father is coming soon. I'll send you out first, in case he doesn't see you when he comes. Hearing that Lin Xiao was going to send her out, Wu Yueling immediately panicked. She quickly stretched out her head to look at little man. Little man only narrowed her eyes at her. So Wu Yueling was relieved, and then obediently let Lin Xiao send her out. Yuan Tianxing and the others saw that Lin Xiao had only come out for a few minutes before she flashed back in. Then in less than 2 minutes, they saw her come out again with little Princess Wu Yueling. I'm going to go into seclusion to level up these 2 days. You guys be careful. Although the hidden danger, Yang Chao, has been eliminated, there may still be remnants of his gang or accomplices, as well as that robber. You guys have to be careful. Lin Xiao put Tiny Tot on the sofa and said to Yuan Tianxing and the others. Lin Wenwen looked at her, nodded, and said, Then before you come out, I won't go out. She knew that the most dangerous person here was only herself, because she had no ability to protect herself now. Lin Xiao looked at her and said, It's good that you understand. She then looked at Wu Yueling and continued, I think Wu Qinghua will come and take Tiny Tot away in a while. I don't know why he brought Tiny Tot here. Wu Yueling raised her head and looked at her, then suddenly pulled her hand. I asked my dad to send me here. I want to play with little man. Lin Xiao looked at her with some surprise. Huh? Is that you? Okay then, be good. Now wait here for your dad to pick you up. Okay? She then rubbed Wu Yueling's soft hair. Wu Yueling nodded at her, then raised her little hand to wipe away the tears on her eyes and face. Yuan Tianxing looked at Lin Xiao with some confusion and said, Are you going to level up again? It feels like for zombies, the dangerous thing like leveling up is nothing to you. Lin Xiao turned her head and looked at him. Of course, do I still look like a zombie now? Yuan Tianxing nodded. Okay, you're special. But the group of zombies around you seem to be different from normal zombies. Is it because of you? Lin Xiao looked at him with a flash in her eyes. Her pair of green eyes with a faint smile. Some things you only need to know in your heart. Don't say it out loud. Lin Wenwen looked at Lin Xiao's eyes, and her expression flashed with a hint of joy. Yes, this was the kind of expression with a smile, but the words were actually threatening people. She had seen it many times before, although the target of Elder Sister's threat was Lin Hao. Because Elder Sister doted on her, she never threatened her. Every time she saw Lin Hao's depressed expression after being scolded, she wanted to laugh. Just like Yuan Tianxing's depressed expression right now. Yuan Tianxing was also a bit depressed at this time. Okay, he blurted out her secret in a moment of carelessness. But she dared to threaten him in front of so many people, she really didn't give him face. Okay, I got it. While feeling depressed, Yuan Tianxing's heart also flashed a trace of strangeness. This familiar way of threatening, he thought he would never encounter it again. Lin Xiao nodded and then flashed back into the space. After she entered the space, she found that little man was already swimming around happily in the lake. After seeing Lin Xiao come in, little man immediately swam towards her. Although Little Man didn't walk fast on land, she was like a fish in the water, and her appearance was extremely carefree, like a fish in water. Lin Xiao looked, and then walked to the open space in front of the small space, and dragged a chair to the lake. Then she began to take off her clothes next to the chair, not caring if Xin Yuzhen in the small space would see. Xin Yuzhen really didn't know how to look, because when she saw Lin Xiao standing by the lake and starting to take off her clothes, she retreated with an awkward face. Although she was very curious about why Lin Xiao was taking off her clothes, it wasn't good to see someone naked, so she suppressed her curiosity. Chapter 370. Lin Xiao took off his clothes and hat. With a head full of green hair, he walked into the water naked. Little man, let's make a deal. Can you let my hair grow a little longer this time? Even if it grows slowly, it will still take 1 or 2 months before it can be seen. As she spoke, she walked into the lake. Little Man stopped in front of her, then stretched out a vine to pull her, and said, and if there is a man with me, Mama's hair will grow out. But now there is no man, so Mama's hair can't grow out. Lin Xiao, why must it be a man? You're just a kid. Don't keep asking me to find a man, okay? Aren't you ashamed? Little Man rolled her big eyes at her. Little Man isn't shy, humph, Lin Xiao. She couldn't care less whose child this was. After Lin Xiao walked down, the water reached her chest. She raised her hand and dived into the water. Little Man swam around her like a large jade white octopus. Its 6 little legs and the large bunch of vines on her hair were all moving in the water. At the same time, he extended a few more tendrils and wrapped them around Lin Xiao, pulling her down to the bottom of the lake. Lin Xiao had been to the bottom of the lake last time and knew that it was very, very deep. But this time, being pulled by Little Man, she found that she was sinking very fast. It should be said that Little Man was swimming very fast. It didn't take long for them to reach the bottom of the lake. Little Man stabbed one of her legs into the ground, and then her level 6 calf was stabbed into the ground. Then, Lin Xiao watched as the vines on Little Man's body and head began to grow wildly. It grew bigger and bigger, taller and taller, longer and longer. When Lin Xiao stood at the bottom of the lake and saw that Little Man had turned into her true form, he was shocked. If this was placed outside, it would probably occupy an area of 300 to 400 square meters. Looking at the countless vines that were as thick as a calf dancing in the air, Lin Fan felt a chill run down his spine. Lin Xiao's scalp went numb. Little Man's 2 eyes were no longer the normal size. Lin Xiao raised his head and looked at the 2 incomparably huge green eyes. They were like 2 lamps flashing in the countless vines. At this moment, Lin Xiao felt that his existence was very small. What a huge vine! The small vine stretched out a few smaller vines and wrapped around Lin Xiao, wrapping her tightly in layers. In any case, Lin Xiao had experienced it a few times before. Now he was somewhat used to Little Vine's vines wrapping around him. She couldn't see anything after the darkness in front of her. A large amount of green energy was seeping into her skin through her pores. That itchy feeling made Lin Xiao want to let out a long sigh. It was a very comfortable and refreshing feeling. As a zombie, she can still have this feeling. I don't know whether it is good or bad. Recalling the time when Wu Qingyue bit her thigh, she felt that her body was really sensitive now. It felt as if a layer of skin had just been peeled off, and then new skin and flesh had grown out. Even the slightest movement would stimulate the tactile nervous system. Very quickly, Lin Xiao felt a very hot feeling rotating in her stomach, and it started rotating from her abdomen, from her intestines to her lower abdomen, and then to her chest, back and forth, up and down, very rhythmically rotating. Just as Little Man was helping Lin Xiao enter recovery mode, Wu Qingyue came from outside. Wei Jingchen saw him appear on the stairs from afar. He opened the door and informed everyone inside. Leader Wu is here. Yuan Tianxing and the others weren't surprised. Calculating the time, it was already past 2 in the afternoon. Even if things were busy, they should have finished a stage. Leader Wu is here to pick up little Lingling, right? Lin Wenwen said. Should be. Lingling, your dad is here. Yuan Tianxing looked at Wu Yueling from the side. After Lin Xiao entered the space, Wu Yueling sat on the sofa and played by herself, ignoring everyone else. Hearing Yuan Tianxing say that her dad was here, Wu Yueling immediately turned to look at the door. But she didn't get down from the sofa. Wu Qingyue was still wearing the same slender black military robe and long military boots. He strode in with his long legs. The hem of his military robe fluttered in the wind as he walked. Lingling, Dad is here to pick you up. Wu Qingyue smiled faintly and nodded at Yuan Tianxing after walking in. Then he said to Wu Yueling. However, his precious daughter didn't act as he had expected. She didn't rush towards him and jump on his lap as soon as she saw him. After all, if his precious daughter was in an unfamiliar environment, she would have this reaction every time she saw him. But this time she didn't. Behind Wu Qingyue were the two ladies, Meng Yu and Mo Li. Because the information Mo Li had was very important after giving it to Wu Qingyue. Because she was also a researcher, Wu Qingyue was afraid that she would get into an accident like Liang Dashu. So he let her follow him. Congratulations, Leader Wu. You've successfully cleaned up the people who opposed you. In the future, there will only be 2 leaders in charge of this base. This base that was divided into 3 parts will be divided into 2 parts in the future. Yuan Tianxing smiled and congratulated him. After all, Wu Qingyue had planned for a long time and waited for this opportunity to counterattack and win. Although Miss Lu from their side was also stirring up trouble, for Wu Qingyue, this was his biggest gain. Wu Qingyue smiled and said, "This is nothing. In the future, when your base is built, it might be better than ours." Yuan Tianxing gestured to the sofa and invited him to sit down as he said, "That time is still too far away. The base can't be built without 2 or 3 years." Wu Qingyue sat next to Wu Yueling and said, "It's only 2 or 3 years. Time flies." Yuan Tianxing nodded in agreement. "That's true." Wu Qingyue turned his head and looked around. He asked, "Where's your Miss Lu? Why don't I see her? I also want to thank her for what happened in the morning. Maybe I wouldn't have found a reason to get rid of Yang Chao so quickly." He said it very nicely, but in the ears of Yuan Tianxing and the others, it meant something else. All right, that female zombie really wouldn't just quietly watch the show. She's a troublemaker. Lin Wenwen smiled and said, "Sister Lu is in her space. It might be a little inconvenient for her to come out." When she was about to say something, she suddenly looked up and saw something. Her expression froze. Then she stared blankly at the top of Wu Qingyue's head. The others noticed her expression and looked up. They saw a few white vines as thick as a woman's calves suddenly hanging down from the ceiling. They quickly rolled toward Xiao Budian. Wu Qingyue saw this and couldn't react in time. In the end, he just pressed Wu Yueling into his arms without thinking. Chapter 371. So in the blink of an eye, they saw a level 7 paranormal with a child being swept away by a few strange vines and disappeared. "Brother Yu." Meng Yu's expression changed greatly as she looked up at the place where the vines disappeared. In the end, he didn't see anything. That's right. These vines wrapped Wu Qingyue and Wu Yueling and disappeared into thin air. At this time, a finger-thin vine suddenly stretched out from the corner, quietly wrapped around Meng Yu's hand, and then quickly disappeared. Meng Yu was stunned for a moment, and then her expression was a little strange. "Miss Meng, how are you?" Seeing her expression, the others also felt very strange. But they were not worried, because Wu Qingyue was also a level 7 lightning expert. How could he be afraid of a vine of unknown origin? Moreover, they did not feel the vine's intention to attack, let alone kill. Because of this, Wu Qingyue's reaction was a beat slower. If it was a vine with malicious intent, it would probably be struck into pieces by Wu Qingyue's lightning as soon as it appeared. Meng Yu looked at the others with a blank and strange expression and said, "That strange vine sent a message to me, saying, 'Borrow a man.'" "What does that mean? Borrow a man for a while?" Everyone was confused and then felt that the other party was too good at borrowing people. Who wouldn't just pick the most powerful one here? Ah, what did the leader get borrowed for? The others shook their heads. Both of them were dumbfounded, and their eyes were filled with question marks. At this time, Wu Qingyue, who was suddenly pulled into the space, also had a blank expression. He held Wu Yueling, and as soon as he arrived at this place, those white vines disappeared. Wu Qingyue looked around vigilantly and found that he was standing by a strange lake. He subconsciously took a few steps back, away from the direction of the lake. Then he turned his head to look around. There was grass, a few sets of furniture on the flat ground, and a strange forest. Apart from here, at a glance, there was a few kilometers of fog. The sky above his head was the same, as if there was a thick layer of fog covering it. He moved his hand, and his expression changed slightly. With one hand holding Wu Yueling, he stretched out the other hand in front of his eyes. The lightning in his hand crackled, but the size was much smaller. Thin electric snakes danced in his hands. Wu Qingyue looked up at the sky. He could not feel a trace of lightning power in the sky. It was as if they had completely lost contact. It wasn't that he couldn't contact it, but he couldn't condense the power of thunder and lightning. To put it simply, his power was suppressed here. He could not even use 1/10 of the power of his superpower. No, not even 5%. Just as he was trying to figure out what was going on, Wu Yueling, who was in his arms, suddenly twisted her body. She slid down from his arms. Lingling, don't run around. It's dangerous here. Wu Qingyue was shocked and quickly pulled her back. However, Wu Yueling shook her head at him and suddenly pointed in the direction of the small space. Wu Qingyue looked over and saw a figure flash by. Who's there? Come out, he shouted. Shen Yuzhen carefully walked out of the small space and then looked at him with a puzzled expression. Because it was a little far away, Wu Qingyue had to look carefully before he recognized Shen Yuzhen. You are Xiaozhen? Wu Qingyue recognized Shen Yuzhen's wife, so he was slightly surprised when he saw Shen Yuzhen. Shen Yuzhen slowly walked over, stood 3 meters away from him, and nodded to him. Wu Qingyue hesitantly looked at her, and then asked, It's really you. You are now a zombie, right? Did you really bite Pu Rukang? Shen Yuzhen timidly looked at him and nodded. Wu Qingyue's eyes calmed down, and then he looked around and asked, Then this is her space, right? Where is she? Why did she suddenly bring us here? Shen Yuzhen pointed to the direction of the lake, and then shook her head. She didn't know why Wu Qingyue suddenly appeared in Lin Xiao's space. She saw that Lin Xiao had gone into the lake not long ago, and he hadn't come up yet. Wu Qingyue turned his head to look at the lake, and then asked her in confusion, What do you mean? You can't talk? Shen Yuzhen shook her head, and then nodded. Wu Qingyue suddenly rummaged in his pocket, and then found a pen and a small notebook. Come here, write on it. Shen Yuzhen didn't disobey, and walked over. She took the pen and paper and wrote a few words. She went into the lake and hasn't come up yet. Wu Qingyue strangely looked at her, and then looked at the words on the paper. Then he turned to look at the lake, puzzled. In the lake? What is she doing in the lake? Wu Yueling, who was beside his leg, poked her head out from time to time and looked in the direction of the lake. Wu Qingyue looked at Shen Yuzhen and asked, You have woken up? Why aren't you with Shen Yuzhen? Does he know you are awake? Shen Yuzhen's expression was a little sad, and then she looked at the stones on the ground and shook her head at him. Wu Qingyue looked at her a few times and seemed to understand her meaning. You don't want to see him like this? You should know that he won't dislike your current appearance, and he doesn't even care that you are a zombie. Why do you still care about this? Shen Yuzhen looked up at him. Something flashed in her eyes. Wu Qingyue faintly said, Feelings are between the two of you. You are suffering here, and he is suffering more than you out there. You can't only think about yourself. If you love him, I don't think you should hide from him. The emotion in Shen Yuzhen's eyes became more intense if she was still alive. At this time, there would probably be tears overflowing. Wu Qingyue wasn't wrong. Feelings were a matter between two people. It was unfair to Shen Yuzhen if she was the only one hiding, but she was not ready to see him yet. Anyway, you have taken revenge, and your wish has been fulfilled. Go back and live well with him. Wu Qingyue said, and suddenly his nose moved, as if he smelled something. He looked at Shen Yuzhen strangely and asked, Did you ask what the smell was? It's a bit weird. Shin Yuzhen sniffed and looked at Wu Qingyue blankly and shook her head. She didn't smell anything? Wu Qingyue looked down at Wu Yueling and asked, Lingling, do you smell anything? Wu Yueling popped her head out from his leg and looked up at him, and then sniffed left and right with her small nose. Then she nodded to him, indicating that she also smelled something strange. The smell was not unpleasant, not fragrant, not sweet. It was just a bit weird and a bit pungent. Shin Yuzhen looked at the two of them with surprise. Is there a smell? But she didn't smell anything? Was it because she was a zombie that she couldn't smell it? Chapter 372. Wu Yueling also smelled it curiously, feeling that the smell was very strange. But for some reason, the more she smelled it, the more she wanted to smell it. In the end, as she smelled it, she began to feel drowsy. Fortunately, she was no stranger to this place. When she felt a little sleepy, she consciously walked to the bed and climbed up. When Wu Qingyue smelled the odor, he suddenly froze. Shin Yuzhen looked at Wu Yueling and knew that she would not be in danger here. Then she looked up at Wu Qingyue and found that his expression seemed to be a little strange. She raised her hand and waved it twice in front of Wu Qingyue. Then she patted his arm with her hand. Wu Qingyue did not respond. His handsome face was dull and his eyes were unfocused. The lightning in his hand had long disappeared. What was going on? Shin Yuzhen looked at Wu Qingyue in surprise and patted him a little harder. However, Wu Qingyue still stood there in a daze with a blank expression. She turned to look at Wu Yueling on the other side of the bed and saw that she had already laid down on the bed and hugged the quilt to sleep. Just when Shin Yuzhen did not know what to do next, she suddenly felt a fluctuation of breath in the lake. She quickly turned her head and saw several long vines coming out of the water. Then it stretched out in their direction. Shin Yuzhen was still very afraid of Little Man's breath. Seeing Little Man appear, and it was coming here, she immediately turned around and ran away in fear, regardless of Wu Qingyue's situation. On second thought, this was Miss Lu's space anyway. She should not hurt Wu Qingyue. 3 or 4 vines stretched out more than 20 meters long and came to Wu Qingyue's side, circling around him for a while. The sharp tips of the vines poked his face for a while, then poked his chest for a while, and then poked Wu Qingyue's smooth waist left and right, not even letting go of his arms. Shin Yuzhen hid in the small space and looked at Wu Qingyue being molested by a few vines with a subtle expression. Well, she should not be wrong, right? It was indeed molesting. In the end, her thoughts were soon confirmed, because Little Man began to pull at Wu Qingyue's clothes. After pulling off his belt, she did not even know how to unbutton it. Anyway, her vines were so thick that she couldn't do the delicate work of unbuttoning. 2 of the little vines drilled into his collar, while the other 2 curled around his hem. Then he pulled hard on both sides. With a few soft sounds, Wu Qingyue's military robe was torn apart. The buttons bounced around and fell to the ground. Then it was the inner shirt and the long military pants inside, which were inevitably ravaged by Little Man. Shin Yuzhen covered her eyes as she watched their leader being stripped naked by a plant with a dazed expression on his face. Soon, she saw Wu Qingyue's firm but not exaggerated muscles, and the lines were mesmerizing. Watching Little Man take off the last piece of Wu Qingyue's underwear, Shin Yuzhen quickly closed her eyes and turned her head. Would she be silenced by the leader in the future? But the leader's body is really good. Shin Yuzhen silently swallowed a mouthful of saliva. With her back facing Wu Qingyue, her mind was filled with Wu Qingyue's slender and muscular body and his long, straight legs. I have my A-ting. No matter how beautiful the leader is, she's not my type. Although Wu Qingyue's expression was sluggish, his consciousness was still clear. At this moment, he was about to collapse. What the hell? What the hell is this situation? Why can't he move now? Although he could still see, it was all blurry. However, he could still sense the feeling in his body clearly. He was stripped by someone. No, it seemed like it wasn't a human. It was a few white vines. What the hell did that female zombie keep in her space? And why was it so perverted? When he felt his whole body was cold, Wu Qingyue found that his body was being pulled towards the lake. He was very panicked, confused, at a loss, and so on. He didn't know what was going to happen next. It felt like his clothes were being stripped off, so he shouldn't be doing anything bad next. Or would it be someone else doing it again? Thinking of this, Wu Qingyue was speechless. He felt that his naked body began to walk towards the lake uncontrollably. When he got closer, he suddenly saw that there was a chair by the lake, and there was a pile of neatly folded clothes on the chair. Whose clothes? Was there someone else in this lake? Could it be a female zombie? And his ability was now completely ineffective because he was now in someone else's space. There was something here that limited the energy of his ability. Looking at his feet step by step into the lake, a cool feeling came from his skin. Soon, Wu Qingyue's expression became sober, but he still kept walking down. There was no way. His arms and waist were wrapped by a few vines, and they were using a force that he couldn't react to drag him down. Wu Qingyue thought, did these vines want to drown him here? Otherwise, why would they keep dragging him into the lake? But when he went down into the lake, the water was over his head. He found that he was wrong, because the lake didn't give him a feeling of suffocation. It was as if he could breathe in the water. The water was very clear, but the bottom was very dark, and he couldn't see what was below. And it seemed that there were no underwater creatures living in this lake, because he didn't even see a fish or a shrimp. The vines kept pulling him down, and then suddenly a lot of vines stretched out from below. Then his whole body was wrapped up in circles. He wanted to struggle, but he even lost the ability to control his body. He couldn't struggle at all, and in the end, he could only watch these strange vines wrap him like a dumpling. Not knowing how deep he went, Wu Qingyue suddenly saw a cocoon wrapped by vines at the bottom. It was about 8 meters tall as a person. The more he looked, the more he felt that there was a person wrapped in it. Wu Qingyue couldn't help but think of his previous situation. Would he look like this now? His skin was tightly wrapped by a layer of cold vines, and the strength of the constriction wasn't strong. It didn't make him feel uncomfortable, and it didn't look like it was loosened. Wu Qingyue suddenly felt that his body control came back, and he could control his own body. But after he moved a few times, he found that even if he could control his body now, he couldn't break away from these vines wrapped around his body. Right here, he suddenly felt a wave of fresh energy from the vines passing through his pores and into his body. Finally, it gathered towards his small stomach. The energy was originally fresh with a chill, but soon it began to slowly heat up in his body. Especially when it reached his lower abdomen, it became boiling hot. Chapter 373. The heat in his abdomen began to spread throughout Wu Qingyue's body. This kind of heat didn't make Wu Qingyue uncomfortable. On the contrary, it made him feel very comfortable. It was like he was soaking in hot water. After the initial unbearable heat passed, there was a feeling of numbness. Wu Qingyue only felt that all the pores in his body had opened up. He let out a long sigh of relief. The heat in his body made him feel very comfortable and refreshed. After this state lasted for dozens of seconds, Wu Qingyue felt that his whole body was floating. His mind also stopped working, and he floated in enjoyment. But not long after, he couldn't calm down, because the burning feeling in his abdomen was getting stronger and stronger. Slowly, it had nowhere to go. It accumulated in his abdomen. Wu Qingyue only felt dizzy. His throat was dry. The fire in his abdomen made him want to vent, but he couldn't find a way. This suffocating feeling immediately cleared Wu Qingyue's mind a little. Why did he feel like he had been drugged with some kind of bad medicine? Wu Qingyue was not in the mood to care why he became like this. He also didn't want to know why he was suddenly pulled into that female zombie space. That's right, he just wanted to vent. Even if he didn't want other people's hands, he could use his own. But he couldn't move now. The burning in his lower abdomen made Wu Qingyue feel like his whole body was on fire. Something was trapped in his heart. It made his heart feel like it was being scratched by something. The itchy feeling couldn't be relieved. At this time, he suddenly felt that he was being moved by something. Then the vines that tightly wrapped around his body suddenly moved. She didn't release him, but slowly moved him around. He didn't know what they were doing. In the end, before he could react, a naked body was suddenly shoved into his arms. A slippery and hot back was pressed against his chest. This push, Wu Qingyue's whole heart was shaken. Suddenly, Wu Qingyue felt his whole body relax. Then he quickly, subconsciously hugged the body in his arms. He turned his head and saw that it was still dark. He reached out a hand and touched. He found that the vines didn't want to let go of him. They just loosened a little so that he could move freely. And who was this woman who suddenly appeared? Wu Qingyue wrapped his arms around her waist. Above her slender and firm waist should be her soft breasts. However, Wu Qingyue still resisted the urge to touch it with his hand. At that moment, Lin Xiao had the urge to die. Originally, she was absorbing the energy from Little Man and was so comfortable that she forgot about the time. Suddenly, he felt someone sticking to his back. By the time she reacted, she felt a strong arm tightly wrapped around her waist, and there was something poking her from behind. Lin Xiao was shocked, and his heart was in a mess. Who is it? How could there be another person here? Where did this man come from? What the hell was Little Man doing? Then, Lin Xiao felt Little Man's restraint on her slightly loosen, and then she was tightly hugged by the man behind her weakly. She wanted to struggle, but because she was absorbing Little Man's power just now, she couldn't do anything. This caused her entire body to enter a state of powerlessness. Her hands and feet were weak, and she couldn't struggle at all. Then she felt another hand start to move around her body, from her neck to her shoulder, and then down from her shoulder. This man's hand brought a burst of numb feeling, which made Lin Xiao feel uncomfortable. Damn it, she felt like she was sold by Little Man. This guy actually lied to her and told her to come down alone. In the end, he had already found another man for her, and she still didn't know who the man behind her was. Lin Xiao gritted her teeth at Little Man and the man behind her, but at the same time, she was confused by the man's restless hand. Suddenly, that hand touched her head. Lin Xiao sensed that the man's body seemed to stiffen for a moment. At that moment, Wu Qingyue touched Lin Xiao's head and felt a tingling sensation on his hand. He didn't feel good. Who was this woman who looked like a baldy? Wasn't this woman that female zombie? Wu Qingyue wanted to push her away, but the woman's soft body and smooth touch made him reluctant to let go. But thinking about the identity of the other person, she was a zombie. A zombie? Could it be that he was going to that with a zombie? That feeling, just thinking about it, made him feel so good. But why didn't this female zombie have any reaction at all? Her whole body was limp, as if she was at his mercy. Let go me? Who are you suddenly? A voice sounded in Wu Qingyue's mind. He was shocked. Who was it? You. Let go. That voice told him to let go. Could it be Wu Qingyue's two hands tightly hugged Lin Xiao's waist and then leaned his head on the back of her head. He asked that voice in his heart, "Are you Miss Liu? Did you pull me in? What do you want to do?" Lin Xiao's voice came over weakly. "It's not me. You can control yourself. Please let go." What she meant was that she couldn't control herself now. Wu Qingyue thought with some surprise. What was the other person's situation now? But he didn't follow Lin Xiao's request to let go and was still tightly stuck behind her. He even rubbed against her buttocks intentionally or unintentionally. "It's too late. You pulled me in to light the fire. Come and extinguish it yourself." Lin Xiao's body went limp from his rubbing, and she almost vomited blood in her heart. "Get lost. It's not me. It's Little Man's doing. Let go." Wu Qingyue tried hard to endure his lower body that was about to explode, and then he laughed lightly in his heart. "I don't know who the little man you're talking about is, but it's impossible for me to move away now." Lin Xiao panicked and said, You know I am. You actually want to do it with a zombie." Wu Qingyue smiled and said, "It doesn't matter. I'll do it even if you give me a sow, Lin Xiao." Was he calling her a sow? Wasn't he? Wasn't he? She said angrily, "If you dare to touch me, I'll castrate you when we get out." Wu Qingyue said, "That depends on whether you have the ability or not. Come, let's get down to business now." As he spoke, he suddenly turned Lin Xiao's body over, and they were face to face. Chapter 374. When Lin Xiao heard his words, she knew something was wrong. But her limbs were weak, and she couldn't break free even if she wanted to. Then she felt her body being turned around by the other party, and they were now face to face. The thing that was poking at her back was now poking at a certain part of her body. Then her lips were sealed, and a slippery, warm tongue licked her lips. Then it pried open her mouth and came in. Lin Xiao wasn't breathing, so she didn't feel suffocated. But the other's tongue was agilely stirring in her mouth. It scraped the roof of her mouth and curled up to entangle with her tongue. "Who are you?" Until now, Lin Xiao still didn't know the other's identity, and the other already knew who she was. Wu Qingyue's movements paused. He was a bit surprised. She actually asked who he was? Didn't she get him in here? But the sweet taste in the other's mouth made Wu Qingyue quickly throw this question to the back of his mind. He sucked on Lin Xiao's lips and replied with 2 words in his heart. "You guess." Lin Xiao wanted to bite him. It would be best if he could bite off the tongue that entered her mouth. But she didn't even have the strength to bite him. Actually, Wu Qingyue was also very curious. He didn't expect this female zombie to taste so good. Although he couldn't smell anything, the taste in his mouth was sweet. And the other's skin was very smooth, and the muscles were very firm and elastic. Lin Xiao gritted her teeth at Little Man. If she still didn't know who was behind this, then she wouldn't be called Lin Xiao anymore. "Little man, if you don't let him stop, I'll deal with you when we get out." The surrounding vines slightly shrunk, and then a voice was transmitted to the 2 people's minds. "Little Man is also helping you guys. Don't stop. Don't stop. Lingling's dad, take care when you get out." Kakaka, Little Man's last laugh, made the 2 people's hearts go cold. It was a strange feeling, but Wu Qingyue quickly forgot about it because his body was swollen to the point where he couldn't take it anymore. Lin Xiao felt that the other's movements were a bit urgent. One of her legs was picked up and hung on the other's strong waist. She was shocked, and her whole body tensed up. "Stop." In the end, what followed was the feeling of being pierced through. She didn't feel any pain, but the feeling of having a foreign object stuffed into her body was very uncomfortable and strange. Fuck, this is too much of a rush. It was as if her brain had exploded, and she suddenly lost all sense of her body. Messy images flashed through her mind. From time to time, Lin Xiao would see himself sitting on top of a naked man, looking down at the man's face, which was filled with suppressed hatred. She recognized this face. It was Wu Qingyue. Then, the scene changed again. She saw that she seemed to be walking in the base. Then, when she looked down, she could see a pair of white long legs wearing exquisite high heel shoes. Also, she was lying under Yang Chao's body, moaning seductively. Looking at Yang Chao's mature face, the other party's expression was calm. It was just that his lower body was constantly shaking with force. Lin Xiao knew that these were not her own memories, but Lu Tianyu's. At this time, the scene in her mind changed again, and suddenly, it turned to another scene. She was also lying on the bed, but the man on top of her had changed from Yang Chao to another man. Yang Jianhua. Lin Xiao was stunned. Why did this man appear? Moreover, Yang Jianhua's expression was very comfortable as he moved on top of her. Drops of sweat fell from his handsome face. "Don't worry, I won't leave you. I will always stay by your side." Yang Jianhua's mouth was moving, and he said something that couldn't be heard clearly. Lin Xiao instantly woke up, and all the scenes in her mind disappeared. Before she could carefully search for the memories, just now, the violent impact made her whole body tremble. The hard thing in her body hit her heart deeply, and the feeling of being at a loss just now suddenly disappeared. Wu Qingyue had just started to straighten up and enter her body when he suddenly stopped. He froze in surprise, and his arms were still tightly wrapped around the soft body in his arms. However, the feeling that his dick seemed to have pierced through a layer of something made him unable to calm down. No way. This female zombie's body was still intact? Hadn't she had a relationship with a man before? This conjecture shocked Wu Qingyue. At this time, a voice quietly came into his mind. "That's because I helped Mama refurbish her body and restore it to its original form. You're really lucky Lingling's father. Wu Qingyue was hit by the words of this voice, and he was stunned. He said in his heart with some disbelief, "You? Is what you said true? Who are you?" The voice replied, "Didn't Mama tell you just now? I'm little man, Wu Qingyue." He thought that this female zombie was fooling him. Little man continued, "This is Mama's new body, so I used my power to refurbish Mama's body. So Mama's first intercourse is given to you. You have to be responsible," Wu Qingyue suddenly asked. "Then does your Mama? She knows about this?" Little man said, "Mama's consciousness has entered the whirlpool of memories. She doesn't feel what you're doing now. She can only feel it when her consciousness returns. So she's still unclear about her own body for the first time." Wu Qingyue silently thought, "Did I earn a lot? Or did I get into trouble?" But Wu Qingyue's mind was quickly attracted by the feeling of his little brother being wrapped up by a layer of softness. He originally rushed in when he was feeling uncomfortable from the swelling, but the tightly wrapped, soft, and warm feeling made him heave a sigh of relief. Moreover, after breaking through that layer and listening to little man's few words, Xiao Man's expression changed. Something in his heart was already different. Wu Qingyue, who quickly made a decision, began to move his waist rhythmically. He slowly and forcefully hit the other's soft and bouncy body. Whether it was a new body or refurbishment, he didn't care about these things now. Right now, he just wanted to release his brother, who was in so much pain. So when Lin Xiao woke up, she felt a fierce hit on her lower body. Although she didn't feel any pain, the frequent hits gave her a strange feeling in her chest. This feeling made her chest tighten and tighten. Every time he came in, the left side of her chest would tighten a bit. Then it would be accompanied by a kind of dull pain. What the hell? How can there be a person who doesn't feel pain down there but instead feels pain in the chest? Is she a heart patient? Chapter 375. Not knowing how long had passed, Lin Xiao only knew that she was floating up and down. Under the surging tide of emotions, she had been enduring the throbbing pain in her heart and the numbness in her body. Just as her consciousness floated for a long time, she suddenly felt that the other's movements suddenly accelerated. Bastard. Lin Xiao was hit by his hot energy, and her whole body stiffened, then slightly trembled. Her consciousness was dizzy. Her whole body floated, as if she was about to be washed away by a flood, fierce and turbulent. Wu Qingyue was nailed to her body, spraying for a full 10 seconds. Then he finally stopped. At this time, the surrounding light suddenly brightened. Wu Qingyue looked at the woman in his arms. He couldn't help but be surprised and reached out to touch her long hair that was so long that it could float down. It was soft and smooth. The length should be just enough to hang down to her chest. But because they were in the water now, it floated back along with the water floating. The female zombie closed her eyes tightly. The pair of dark eyes on her delicate face could not be seen, but it became very quiet and beautiful. Slender and beautiful eyebrows, thick and curly eyelashes, straight and exquisite nose, delicate light pink cherry lips. Wu Qingyue stared at her facial features, then began to use his hand to gently trace the lines of her facial features. He felt that her whole body was like a boneless mermaid, being held in his arms. There was suddenly a place in his heart that was slowly collapsing, then being filled up again by something. Wu Qingyue looked around and found that they were still in the water. It was still clear to his eyes. There were no vines, nor any other strange things. He hung the female zombie's slender arm around his neck and then swam up with her. He clearly looked up and didn't seem to be far from the water surface, but he swam for a long time before breaking out of the water. Wu Qingyue, who was out of the water, turned his head and looked around. He saw his baby daughter squatting next to the chair by the lake. At this time, Wu Yueling also saw Wu Qingyue coming out of the water. Her eyes immediately lit up. She looked at Wu Qingyue's side with sparkling eyes. Wu Qingyue dragged Lin Xiao over there, then carried her up from the lake. Wu Yueling was very sensible. She held Wu Qingyue's clothes that were destroyed by Little Man and stood there waiting. Lingling, don't look at Daddy. Turn around and close your eyes. Dad isn't wearing any clothes right now. Wu Qingyue stood in the water until the water reached his waist. He told Wu Yueling. Wu Yueling obediently held his clothes and turned around with her back, facing Wu Qingyue. Wu Qingyue carried Lin Xiao out of the water. Then, he walked towards the direction of the bed. He put Lin Xiaoping on the bed and covered her with a blanket. Then he turned around and walked over to Wu Yueling. He bent down to take his clothes from her back. Lingling, Daddy has to put on some clothes now. Daddy said that you can only open your eyes when I open them. Okay? Wu Yueling nodded. After Wu Qingyue took the clothes from her hands, she raised her hands to cover her eyes. Wu Qingyue searched through the pile of clothes Wu Yueling had given him and found his underwear that had been torn into strips. What kind of expression should he use to pay homage to his torn underwear? No, it shouldn't be mourning his underwear now. It should be, what should he wear now? Shouldn't he wear it? It didn't feel good to have his dick swinging around in his pants. After thinking about it, he looked towards the direction of the furniture. There were a few wardrobes over there. Was there any male underwear? Thinking that this was a female zombie space, she would probably only collect female clothes. However, Wu Qingyue still had the attitude of trying to find it. He walked over and opened the clothes to take a look. The first one was all female. None. The second one was all children's. None. The third one found it, and they were all male clothes. Wu Qingyue delightedly found a brand new pair of men's underwear at the bottom of the wardrobe that was filled with men's clothes. After putting on his underwear, he casually found a suitable set of plain clothes in the wardrobe and put it on. This was because his uniform had been destroyed by the vines. After Wu Qingyue put on the clothes, he turned around and called Wu Yueling. Okay, Lingling, come here. When Wu Yueling heard his call, she immediately turned her head around. Then she happily ran towards him. Wu Qingyue sat on the sofa with her in his arms, then looked around. Suddenly, he said to the air, "You said your name is Little Man, right? Can you send us out now? This female zombie. She can't wake up in this state right now." Sitting on his lap, Wu Yueling also raised her head to look around, but she was looking in the direction of the lake. At this time, she saw a few thick vines falling from the sky. They were still jade white. However, it looked a little different. It looked a little illusory, and they were all directly falling from the white misty sky. Like 10,000 feet long vines, they hung down high. Wu Yueling and Wu Qingyue looked up curiously at the sky vines falling from the sky. Their eyes were full of surprise. The vines gently wrapped around their hands. A voice rang out. "Little man can send you out." Wu Yueling looked up at the sky vines above her head with her mouth slightly open. She asked, "Why did you go to the sky? Are you not in the lake? Why don't you come out?" Little man replied, "I'm about to become a baby, so I can't come out now. I have to wait for Mama to give birth to me." Hearing this, Wu Yueling nodded excitedly. "So you will become a baby when you come out?" Little man replied, Yes, but it will take a long time. You have to wait." Wu Yueling nodded. Wu Qingyue asked, "What are you? What's the relationship between you and her?" Little man replied to him, "She is my mama. I'm Little Man." Wu Qingyue felt that he didn't quite understand her answer, so he changed the topic. "When will she wake up like this?" Little man replied, "Mama is now in the whirlpool of memories. It's up to her to come out." Little man doesn't know either. Wu Qingyue silently looked in the direction of Lin Xiao and suddenly asked, "Her body can be restored to a normal person. Did you help her restore it?" Little man replied proudly, That's right. Little man's energy is used to repair zombies and humans. It's just that little man's energy isn't very effective on living humans. At most, it can only heal them a little." Chapter 376. Wu Qingyue was silent for a while, then sighed and said, "You're already very good. Don't tell anyone else about this in the future, okay?" Little man said happily, "Got it, Papa." Wu Qingyue's expression suddenly froze. He raised his head and asked with a confused face, "Wait, what did you call me?" Little man replied blankly, "Papa. In the future, when I go out, I will become your and Mama's baby." Wu Yueling also heard Little Man's reply to Wu Qingyue. She immediately patted Wu Qingyue's hand and nodded to him. Wu Qingyue looked down at her. and saw that her eyes were full of rare happiness and expectation. He couldn't help but ask with a headache, Lingling, do you know what we were talking about? Why are you so happy? Do you really want a younger sister or brother? Or, suddenly he stopped, then turned his head to look at Lin Xiao, pointing at Lin Xiao and asked Wu Yueling, do you want to call her mother? He thought Wu Yueling would shake her head, but Wu Yueling nodded to him. Wu Qingyue looked at her with some hesitation and asked with a strange expression, you mean, you want her to be your stepmother? Wu Yueling nodded like a chick pecking rice. Wu Qingyue looked at her, and suddenly a thought flashed in his mind. Why do I feel that you and little man are hiding something from us? Are you very familiar with her? Wu Yueling first looked at Wu Qingyue blankly, then heard him ask if she was familiar with little man. She nodded, indicating that although they were not very familiar, they were very familiar. But they were good friends. Wu Qingyue thought of the female zombie's reaction just now, then suddenly raised his head and asked, are you still hiding something from her? She doesn't even know who I am, right? Little man was silent for a while, then said, because mommy's last body repair is also a very important change for little man. So it needs a man's sperm and male energy to complete. But little Ling said she likes my mommy, so I asked her if she wants to call me mommy like me. Little Ling said yes. Wu Qingyue raised his head and stared at her with a subtle expression and said, so you kidnapped me here, right? You really have guts to not let your mother know about it. Let's see how she'll deal with you when she wakes up. He didn't know if it was a man's psychological effect, but after tasting the wonderful taste of this female zombie, he now thought that if little man brought another man in, and then took the female zombie's body and delicious taste for himself, there would be a fire burning in his heart. A corner of his heart suddenly rejoiced that he was the one who came in. Wu Qingyue looked back at the female zombie lying quietly on the bed. That peaceful sleeping face was very beautiful. Her originally bald head now had a head of beautiful hair, which was scattered messily on the pillow. He stood up and carried Wu Yueling to the bedside. Then he sat on the bed and looked at the female zombie's face closer. Good job, Lingling. He suddenly turned his head and praised Wu Yueling, then said, you can call her mom from now on. Do you understand? Hearing this, Wu Yueling smiled happily. Seeing Wu Yueling smile, Wu Qingyue's heart melted. He suddenly found that ever since Lingling met this female zombie, there were more smiles on her face, and she became more cheerful. Although she still didn't speak, this change already made Wu Qingyue very happy. And he was also a little curious about this female zombie, seeing that she had always taken care of his Lingling and even saved Lingling a few times. Now this situation, it really was as Mengyu said. He could marry her. Last time he bit her thigh, and this time he directly ate her whole body. Well, he still didn't know how this female zombie would react when she wakes up. Wu Qingyue reached out to lift Lin Xiao's chin and carefully looked at her facial features. The more he looked, the more familiar he felt, as if he had seen her somewhere before. The first time he saw her wearing the contact lenses he gave her, she didn't have those familiar zombie eyes. He felt that she gave him another familiar feeling, but he couldn't tell what was familiar. After looking at her delicate facial features, Wu Qingyue let go of his hand and said to Wu Yueling, since you like her so much, then Dad will help you marry her. Okay? Dad already ate her. You have to be responsible for her in the future. Wu Yueling didn't really understand what Wu Qingyue meant by eating her, but when she heard that he wanted to marry Lin Xiao, although she didn't quite understand what he meant, she vaguely knew that this was a good thing. She immediately nodded to Wu Qingyue. At this time, little man in the sky also shook her heavenly vine, saying, and me, you also have to be responsible for me. From now on, you are my dad. I want to be little Lingling's little sister. Wu Qingyue looked at her with a subtle expression and asked, then you have to let me see your real body, right? I don't even know what you are. How can I be responsible for you? Besides, you are the one who pulled me in. Shouldn't you be responsible for me? Little man was stunned by his question. Huh? That seems to be right. Then I will become your baby after a while. At that time, you will still have to be responsible. Humph. Wu Qingyue listened to her coquettish and shameless tone and was a bit speechless. But he still caught a key point. He asked, you said, You're going to become a baby? You can't be in her stomach right now, right? While speaking, Wu Qingyue suddenly stared at Lin Xiao's lower abdomen. Little man excitedly replied, Soon, little man is only half in now. There is still half. Wu Qingyue. After the end of the world, there were strange things every year, but today there were especially many. Zombies don't eat people. Zombies can save people. Zombies become beautiful. Zombies can talk. Zombies can build a base. Zombies can give birth to babies. The last point still needed to be verified. In any case, Wu Qinghua felt that, ever since he met this female zombie, the zombies around her were all changing, becoming different. They became different from ordinary zombies, becoming human with memories. And they weren't like Yang Chao, who became monsters. They all changed back to human beings. At this time, Little Man said, Little Man is going to send you out. Little Man still needs to continue to help Mama upgrade her energy, so that Mama can give birth to babies. While speaking, she pulled Wu Qingyue and Wu Yueling, and the two of them flashed, bringing them out of the space. The people who had been waiting in the living room for the whole night suddenly saw Wu Qingyue change his clothes and appear with Wu Yueling in his arms. They didn't react for a while. Chapter 377. Leader Wu, you're out. Do you have any changes? Lin Wenwen was the first to react. He looked at him with slight delight and asked. But looking at his clothes, it seemed like something really happened. Brother Yu? Meng Yu also came over happily. Yuan Tianxing smiled calmly and asked him, Did you go into Miss Lu's space? If you don't come out, these two ladies are going to tear this place apart. He then looked at Meng Yu and Mo Li meaningfully. We're just worried about Leader, Mo Li said expressionlessly. Yuan Tianxing nodded. I know. Wu Qingyue hugged Wu Yueling and put on his usual smile to the crowd. I'm fine, Miss Lu is probably the one who's in trouble. He ate them all, so she was the one who was in trouble. Although Wu Qingyue felt that Little Man's words were a little unbelievable. If the heavenly vine really turned into a baby through his and Miss Lu's intercourse, then it was serious. Meng Yu looked at his clothes. Brother Yu, your clothes. Wu Qingyue smiled faintly. Oh, they fell into the lake and got wet. So I changed them with the set in her space. Meng Yu didn't hear the hidden meaning in his words and nodded. Yuan Tianxing, on the other hand, glanced at Wu Qingyue subtly. From a man's point of view, he could tell that Wu Qingyue was lying. All right, we won't disturb you anymore. We came to pick up Lingling and didn't expect to be delayed until now. No need to send us off. Wu Qingyue smiled, as if he didn't notice Yuan Tianxing's strangeness. After saying that, he carried Wu Yueling and walked out the door. Take care. Yuan Tianxing and the others smiled at him and walked them to the door. Seeing Wei Jingxin close the door, Yuan Tianxing smiled meaningfully. Do you think Leader Wu and Miss Lu are fine? Du Yuanxing and Long Qingying looked at him blankly. What could happen to them? But why did he go in for so long? Why didn't I see Miss Lu come out? Only Lin Wenwen seemed to have guessed something and said hesitantly, Why did Leader Wu change his clothes? Yuan Tianxing glanced at her and said nothing. At that moment, Lin Xiao was walking in a dark space. She didn't know where she was, and she didn't know why she kept walking. He didn't know how long he would have to walk and where he would stop. As she walked, she suddenly saw some light in front of her. She quickened her pace and saw an image from the bright spot. The place where the light penetrated was like a circular display screen. She saw that she was wearing a black military uniform, but behind her was a blazing black evil fire. She could feel a sense of familiarity from the flames, as if they were supposed to appear around her. Lin Xiao knew that this was the underworld flame that Du Yuanxing and the others had mentioned many times. The woman in the black military uniform was also her, because she looked exactly the same as her. But at this moment, Lin Xiao's face was cold and fierce. His eyes shone with madness. Behind the woman was a cliff, and across from her were 5 men. She felt the powerful energy of these 5 men, and their level was no lower than Wu Qingyue and Yang Chao. Lin Xiao saw that among the 5 men, the one in the middle was very beautiful. He had a feminine aura, and he opened his mouth to say something to her. She had coldly replied to him, and then the man seemed to fly into a rage out of humiliation. He said a few more words to her, and then her face became gloomy. Then he saw the herb on the screen, and the expression on his face suddenly turned into a maniacal smile. Her long hair began to dance without any wind, and with the black torch behind her, she looked like a witch coming into the world. Her military robe fluttered in the wind. A pair of beautiful long legs were wrapped in military trousers, and on her feet was a pair of high-heeled female military boots. She stood steadily on the edge of the cliff, and then laughed arrogantly. But Lin Xiao noticed that the black flames behind her began to shrink violently. Seeing the flames shrink, the faces of the men on the opposite side suddenly changed. Then they quickly retreated. But in the blink of an eye, Lin Xiao looked at herself, who was like a witch, and suddenly exploded. The black flames suddenly exploded and instantly covered the area of 1,000 meters. Lin Xiao only felt that the whole scene turned black, and then the whole scene disappeared. These scenes should be her memories. But why didn't she feel that they had happened at all? Was she missing something? And that flame, it was very similar to her current black fog. When it was released, it was pitch black. Sure enough, she should quickly go to the edge of the cliff to have a look. Lin Xiao, who was puzzled, decided to go to the south to find that place by herself after the construction of the base stabilized. She had a premonition that this scene must be a sign for her. Maybe she could find back the memories she had lost in the past 5 years. For some reason, Lin Xiao started to walk back. She didn't know why, but she felt that she should go back now. At this time, in the space, Little Vine's heavenly vine fell from the sky. It lifted the quilt on Lin Xiao's body, and then wrapped around her stomach, waist, and legs. It picked her up from the bed, and then moved in the direction of the lake. Lin Xiao's body sank into the water, and then was wrapped into a jade white vine cocoon by the vines that emerged from the water. This time, Little Vine didn't just use a few vines to wrap around Lin Xiao, but countless vines wrapped around Lin Xiao, slowly wrapping her into a huge vine ball. This vine ball almost filled the entire bottom of the lake. After Little Vine's heavenly vine appeared, Shin Yuzhen in the space and the zombie dogs in the forest all quietly hid, not daring to move. Outside the space, Yuan Tianqing and the others were discussing when to set off for the new base. Lin Wenwen subconsciously looked at the ceiling. But Sister Lu hasn't come out yet. Don't we need to wait for her? Yuan Tianqing thought for a moment and said, I don't think we need to wait for her. If she doesn't see us when she comes out, she should be gone. We don't know how long we have to wait for her. It's better to go there first, open the construction site, and build the base as soon as possible. Du Yuanqing asked, then should we continue the recruitment here? Yuan Tianqing nodded and said, continue, why not? Otherwise, when do you think we can build the base with just a few hundred people? Chapter 378. Du Yuanqing murmured, 300 or 400 people isn't a small number. It's just building a wall. We don't need that many people, right? Yuan Tianqing smiled and glanced at him. You think we don't need to clean up the buildings inside the wall? Don't we need to clean up the houses? Don't we need to clean up the roads? Du Yuanqing heard this and immediately thought of such a large area to clean up. He was a bit depressed. That's right, we still need to clean up the houses that can be lived in. Wow, there are so many abandoned cars on the road. If only we could get the zombies to help us pick up the garbage. Long Qingying said, that's a good idea, but you have to go find Miss Lu or Miss Qiu Lily for help. Hearing that he had to deal with Lin Xiao or Qiu Lily, the two terrifying zombies, Du Yuanqing shook his head and said, No, I think we can clean it up quickly. Lin Wenwen rolled his eyes and said, At least you don't have to worry about zombies suddenly attacking while you're working. Don't be dissatisfied. The others nodded. It was indeed so. When they were building the base, they had to send half of the people to guard it to prevent a sudden attack from the zombies. The other half of the people could then move the bricks and walls with peace of mind. At that time, everyone's state of mind was different from now. At that time, most people were afraid, desperate, panicked, and didn't know what to do. Unlike now, they were used to the environment of the apocalypse and even the zombies were very familiar. 5 years, no matter what, they should be used to it. Yuan Tianqing said decisively. Old Du, you stay here and continue the recruitment work. I'll leave Junjie and Wenqing to help you. We'll wait for another day tomorrow. If Miss Lu still doesn't appear, then we'll leave at 4 in the afternoon and should be there by 6. Everyone nodded and didn't say anything. On the other side, Wu Qingyue was wearing sportswear, carrying Wu Yueling back to the inner district. Along the way, he didn't say anything, although he maintained a smile on the corner of his mouth. But Meng Yu, who had been paying attention to him, found that he was distracted. Brother Yu, you've been inside for the whole night. Is it really okay? Meng Yu followed behind him and asked. Emily also believed that Wu Qingyue had arranged for her to stay in a house nearby. He had also assigned 2 level 5 metahumans to be her bodyguards. In any case, her reflexes and self-defense abilities were pretty good. As long as he didn't encounter a level 6 or 7 enemy, his life wouldn't be in danger. Hearing Meng Yu's words, Wu Qingyue walked to the sofa and put Wu Yueling down. He asked her to sit on the sofa and looked up at Meng Yu. Something did happen, but I'm afraid that you might not be able to take it if I tell you. Yu, for the past 5 years, I've always treated you as a friend or sister. You should know. Wu Qingyue put away the smile on his face and said to her seriously, sit down and let's have a good talk. Meng Yu looked at his expression and his words. Suddenly, she had a very bad premonition in her heart, giving her the urge to turn around and leave. However, she still obediently sat on the sofa next to him. Then, he looked at Wu Qingyue, waiting for him to continue. Wu Qingyue thought for a moment and said to her, you've been working with me for the past few years. You're very capable. I like capable people. In front of outsiders, we're just superiors and subordinates. Back at home, we're just friends. But now, I've always treated you as a sister in my heart. I also hope that you can find a good man to accompany you for the rest of your life. The more Meng Yu listened to him, the more flustered she became. She suddenly said, Brother Yu, don't say it. However, Wu Qingyue didn't intend to stop. He continued, I don't know when you suddenly fell in love with me. It's not your fault. What's wrong is that I can't respond to your special feelings. Just like you can't respond to Yunlong's feelings for you now. I believe you can understand what I'm thinking. Because they were all in the same situation. Meng Yu had always been a calm woman, but at this time, she suddenly stood up and said in a panic, Brother Yu, the meal hasn't been cooked yet. I'm going to cook, Wu Qingyue said. Sit down. Let me finish what I have to say. Meng Yu shook her head and looked at him. No, I don't want to hear it. Wu Qingyue sighed and said, sit down. Even if I don't say it now, sooner or later, I have to say it. Be obedient. Meng Yu looked at him blankly for a moment, and then sat down in a daze. But her expression was somewhat painful, and her mind was very confused. Why did her brother Yu suddenly say this to her? Although brother Yu had never given her a chance before, and always kept a distance from her. In order to avoid embarrassment, she lived here with Xiao Yunlong and the other 2. But she never thought of giving up. She thought that one day, brother Yu would see her infatuation, and then perhaps wake up, and then accept her little by little. But now he wanted to make their relationship clear. His words indicated that he was going to refuse her now. Meng Yu suddenly couldn't accept it. She didn't want to hear Wu Qingyue refuse her. She didn't want to hear it, but she didn't dare to disobey Wu Qingyue's words. She was afraid that Wu Qingyue would hate her because of this. Wu Qingyue looked at her expression and sighed in his heart. But there were some things that if he didn't say it, then the expectation in her heart would only grow deeper and deeper. Then in the end it might form a psychological suggestion, which would be very troublesome. He touched Wu Yueling's hair and said, You said last time that I should find a mother for Lingling. So I've already started to think about it. You're not young anymore. Don't waste your time on me. If you really don't want to accept Yunlong, then you can consider other people. Meng Yu opened her eyes and looked at him. When she heard this, her nose couldn't help but turn sour and her eyes turned red. A feeling of grievance suddenly rose in her heart, making her want to cry. She suddenly stood up again, but this time she didn't say anything. He turned around and ran upstairs, rushing into his room. Wu Qingyue looked at her hurriedly running upstairs and sighed again. He said to Wu Yueling, "Dad made your Aunt Yu cry. What should we do? Won't the two of us have dinner tonight?" After the end of the world, because he had Ling Ling by his side, everyone thought that he was married. But he wasn't. Before the end of the world, he was still a bachelor. With his appearance and identity, there were certainly not a few women who liked him. But he was a picky man. If he didn't like them, he wouldn't touch them. So he had always relied on the five-fingered girl to vent his feelings. Chapter 379. Later, after the end of the world came, on one hand, there was the great change of the apocalypse, and on the other hand, there was Ling Ling. So along the way, there were a lot of people following him. After building a base, there was a place to stay. With Ling Ling, his mind at home was thinking about how to be a good father, and outside thinking about how to be a good leader, how to manage the base, and provide a safe and comfortable place for the survivors to live. In a base without zombies, there was food, drink, shelter, and sleep. These needed him and the other two leaders to worry about. So the more people, the more problems. The more problems, the more busy he was. So busy, he was not in the mood to think about emotional problems. When he discovered Meng Yu's feelings, it was already a bit late. But as a companion who had always stayed by his side, he certainly could not drive a girl away. So he had to intentionally or unintentionally keep a distance from her, so that she could give up on this idea. But later he found that Meng Yu was a persistent woman, so he originally planned to slowly pull away from her, and secretly help Xiao Yunlong create a lot of opportunities for the two of them. He just hoped that Xiao Yunlong could quickly chase after her, but it was useless. A stupid teammate would only hold him back. If it wasn't for the heavenly vine that the female zombie raised these 2 days, he really did not intend to directly explain it to Meng Yu, because he knew how serious the impact of what he said now was to her. But he had already identified the female zombie, in order to avoid future misunderstandings and troubles. He must now make things clear to Meng Yu. Otherwise, with her stubborn character, he did not know how she would react after knowing about him and the female zombie. Maybe she would do something irrational. When Wu Yueling heard his words, she blankly looked at the direction of the stairs where Meng Yu left. Then she looked back at him with two big, bright eyes, a face full of doubt. Wu Qingyue said, "Ling Ling, sit here. Dad will go cook." "Okay. Are you hungry?" Wu Yueling nodded, then obediently sat on the sofa. Wu Qingyue stood up and walked towards the kitchen. But in his mind, he thought that in this situation, he had to let Meng Yu be alone. Maybe she would get over it. He also had to send people to investigate the identity of the female zombie. He didn't even know her full name. She only knew that she was called Miss Liu, and she had called herself Lin Xiang last time. What forest? And that face of hers. I don't know why. The more he thought about it, the more familiar it seemed. He might have seen it somewhere before. He just couldn't remember. There was another problem. That female zombie seemed... Maybe. It seemed... She didn't know that the person who ate her yesterday was him. I wonder what her reaction will be when she finds out. Thinking of this, Wu Qingyue's mood suddenly improved. The depression brought by Meng Yu just now was slightly relieved, making him feel a lot more relaxed. While Wu Qingyue went to the kitchen to cook, Yuan Tianxing and the others also started to eat dinner. In the space, Lin Xiao was wrapped in a huge rattan ball. She had already lost consciousness. No one knew that the huge vine was dissipating bit by bit. That's right, it dissipated. But at the same time, a breath began to slowly seep into Lin Xiao's womb. This aura belonged to Little Man Man. Aside from everything under the water, there was no other change in the space. That night, Wu Qingyue called Xiao Liqing to the study. He gave him a task to do. This task was to investigate the detailed information of the female zombie. Xiao Liqing went to do the task with a blank face. He wondered why their leader sent him to investigate other people's accounts. Then when Xiao Liqing made his move, Kong Qingming immediately received the news. He ran to Lu Tiany's office at noon the next day and said something as soon as he entered the door. "I say, could it be that Leader Wu found out that your big sister is the person who did that to him before?" Lu Tianyi was just about to look at the data of this month's harvest when he heard this sentence. He raised his head and looked at him blankly. Who are you talking about? Kong Qingming walked to the sofa in his office and sat down. He crossed his arms and said to him lazily, Big Sister Lu. Right now, Leader Wu is about to send people to investigate her. So I'm guessing that Leader Wu suspects her and sent people to investigate her. Otherwise, why didn't he investigate before and now suddenly send people to investigate her? Lu Tianyi's expression also became serious. He felt that if it was really like what Kong Qingming said, then it seemed that Wu Qingyue couldn't know the truth. Kong Qingming seemed to know his concerns and said calmly, Don't worry, I secretly covered up the news. And I also found that the people at the Hades base seem to be hiding this matter. So if Leader Wu wants to know Big Sister Lu's identity, it may not be so fast. Lu Tianyi breathed a sigh of relief, and the expression on his handsome face slightly relaxed. He said to him, Thank you. Kong Qingming looked at him strangely and said, What are you thanking me for? After all, Big Sister Lu saved us once. We all owe her. It's just why did Big Sister Lu change so much after becoming a zombie? Lu Tianyi leaned on his chair and touched his chin. He said, Could it be that when she died, it was too much of a shock? So after becoming a zombie, she suddenly thought of turning over a new leaf? Becoming a human again? Bah, becoming a corpse again? Kong Qingming looked at him with a funny smile and asked, She is your sister. You know her the best. Do you think that's possible? If she wanted to turn over a new leaf, she would have turned over a long time ago. Lu Tianyi looked at him with some dissatisfaction. Why is it not possible? At the time of the greatest setback, people often have remorse or awakening. Why can't I believe that she has woken up? Kong Qingming looked at him speechlessly and nodded helplessly. Okay. I knew you would only think in this direction. But maybe your guess is right. Looking at Big Sister Lu's current performance, it is indeed similar to what you said. But why do I find that the degree of your sister complex is getting bigger and bigger now? Lu Tianyi crossed his arms in front of his chest and said, I have been protecting her for a long time. Did you only find out now? Kong Qingming was speechless. He felt that if he continued to discuss his sister's problem with this guy, it would be endless. But Lu Tianyi quickly asked him a question, which immediately made him unable to sit still. Hey, that night, I clearly asked you to knock on Lin Wenwen's door. Why did you suddenly drag me over? I felt that you were a little strange that time. What are you doing? Chapter 380. But Lu Tianyi quickly asked him a question that immediately made him unable to sit still. Hey, by the way, I clearly told you to knock on Lin Wenwen's door that night. Why did you suddenly drag me over? I just felt that you were a little strange that time. What are you doing? Kong Qingming's beautiful face froze for a moment, and a trace of surprise flashed in his long and narrow eyes. He thought of that cold face that day, although the facial features were not very delicate. But that pair of sharp eyes left a deep impression on him, and he could still feel the other party's knife-like eyesight. I just felt that the eyes of the woman with the hair were inexplicably a little scary. I couldn't hold her back, so I subconsciously dragged you over. In fact, I don't know what's going on. Hearing his somewhat dazed answer, Lu Tianyi's eyes lit up. He suddenly uncrossed his hands in front of his chest, stared at him with interest, and stood up. Then he walked around the desk to stand in front of Kong Qingming, stood up, and bent down to stare at his face. Qingming, do you feel that your face right now is a little hot? Kong Qingming was stunned for a moment, and then subconsciously reached out to touch his face. Then Lu Tianyi laughed. Ha 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 ha. Then he just laughed merrily and said nothing. Kong Qingming looked at him with a puzzled expression. Seeing that he kept laughing, he asked angrily, If you have something to say, say it. Why are you laughing like a ghost? Lu Tianyi covered his forehead and laughed. He waved his hand at him and walked back to his seat to sit down. Ha ha, let me laugh. I can't help it now. Kong Qingming's face darkened from his laughter, and he glared at him. Tell me clearly. Lu Tianyi reluctantly stopped laughing, then looked at him and asked, How about this? You answer a few questions for me first. Did you feel a jolt in your heart when you saw her sharp eyes that day? Kong Qingming thought of that ordinary but clean face, but his attention was still shocked by that pair of eyes. He nodded. Lu Tianyi continued to ask, so at that time, did you subconsciously feel a little flustered, and then your body moved a step faster than your brain to escape? Kong Qingming's situation at that time was indeed a subconscious action of his body, and his brain was at a loss at that time. He nodded. Lu Tianyi smiled again. He put his hands on the table and rested his forehead on his hands. Ha 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 ha. Kong Qingming felt sick from his laughter. He couldn't help but curse. Can you stop laughing? Can you speak properly? Only then did Lu Tianyi raise his head and look at him amusedly. Qingming, your ability to do things is quite strong. Why are you so slow in this aspect? Kong Qingming looked at him with question marks on his head. In this aspect? Which aspect? Lu Tianyi looked at him a few times, but shook his head and said, well, I think it's more meaningful for you to discover it yourself. I won't talk about it. Listen to me. Remember to follow your heart and do what you want to do. Kong Qingming was annoyed to death by him. Wasn't it the same as not saying anything at all? What are you talking about? Why can't I understand a single word? Lu Tianyi shook his head and said nothing. After that, no matter how Kong Qingming asked, he just smiled at him. In the end, Kong Qingming left laughing so hard that smoke was coming out of his 7 orifices. When he left, he didn't know if it was because of the woman he mentioned just now. That indifferent face kept appearing in his mind. She was plain-looking, but very clean. Also, she had a strong temperament, but she kept people thousands of miles away. Her figure was quite good. In the afternoon, Yuan Tianqing left the base in Haicheng with Lin Wenlong, Qing Ying, and Lu Junjie. They went to the uptown of Hangzhou. The rattan ball wrapped around Lin Xiao's body was still slowly disappearing in the space, but it was too big. After a whole day, less than 1% of the rattan ball disappeared. Lin Feng and Chen Yuding first took some people to clean up the hotel and checked all the usable furniture. Those that were broken or had too many bloodstains were moved out or burned. Mrs. Lin and the other women also helped to clean all kinds of quilts and bedsheets. There was so much work that they couldn't finish even if they were busy for a few days. However, Lin Feng and the others weren't in a hurry. After all, this was just the beginning. They had to take it one step at a time. Qiu Lily and Ming Ming stayed on the top of the building and watched them silently, but they wouldn't help. On the other side, Lin Hao also began to sweep the surrounding area for supplies and food. After a busy day, in the evening, then they heard a car driving in. Needless to say, the car that could drive through the zombie wall must be one of their own. Otherwise, the car wouldn't be able to drive in. Hearing the car, Lin Feng immediately thought of Yuan Tianqing and the others. Tianqing and the others are back, right? So everyone stopped what they were doing and looked at the road in front of the hotel. Lin Feng and Chen Yuding looked at each other and said after checking their watches, it's almost time. Let's call it a day. It's time to eat. Chen Yuding nodded. An SUV stopped in front of the hotel. Long Qingying, who liked to sit on the roof, was the first to jump down. Then the door opened and Yuan Tianqing, Lin Wenwen, and the others got out. Seeing Lin Feng and the others standing in front of the hotel, they were relieved. Mrs. Lin took Lin Xiaolu's hand and looked into the car. Then she asked Lin Wenwen, who was a few meters away, what? Wenwen, why did you cut your hair? What happened? Lin Wenwen touched the tip of her hair and smiled naturally. Nothing. I just felt that it was troublesome to have long hair. So I cut it. Mrs. Lin and Cheng Wangxue looked at her strangely. How is that possible? Would you cut your hair because it was troublesome? What's going on? Tell me. Lin Wenwen had to answer. Mom, I want to change my character. Didn't you all say that I was too willful? Then I will change in the future. So, I made up my mind. So, I just cut my hair. What's wrong with that? Mrs. Lin looked at her strangely. How many times have I said that you were willful? You didn't seem to care. Why do you want to change now? Cheng Wangxue nodded and said, yes. Lin Wenwen said helplessly, well, don't worry about me. Anyway, I have cut it and I don't regret it. Or is it because I am too ugly and you are not used to it? Mrs. Lin and Cheng Wangxue nodded and said, it is a bit ugly. Now that you mention it, I am really not used to it. Lin Feng and the others nodded in agreement. Looking at the rough and messy short hair in front of her, Lin Luoran felt a bit uncomfortable. Thinking of her black straight hair before, she was really not used to it. However, Mrs. Lin quickly changed the topic and suddenly asked, "By the way, didn't Miss Lu come back with you?" And Yuanxing. Lin Wenwen replied, "Oh, Sister Lu is not here yet." As for Du Yuanxing, he stayed in Haiqing to continue recruiting workers. "We need more people to come here." Chapter 381. There were two kinds of recruitment notices that they put out afterwards. One kind was for pure workers, who only came to do work. The other kind was for base residents, who could accept people who wanted to change the environment of the new base. Anyway, as long as they weren't too bad or evil, or humans like the bandits in the Doomsday, they would accept them. Of course, there were many conditions to join, and their position in the base would be assigned according to their contributions to the new base. This was the rule of every base. Mrs. Lin asked with concern, "Miss Lu, what's the matter?" Lin Wenwen said with a smile, "She should be fine. Well, let me tell you what happened in High City yesterday." Hearing this, the others immediately looked over curiously. Only Mrs. Lin looked a little worried, but she didn't continue to ask. Instead, she walked into the hall with the others. Yuan Tianqing said to Chen Yuding and Lin Feng, "Oh, yesterday Yang Chao and his group of people in High City were kicked out by Leader Wu and Leader Zhou. Yang Chao is dead." Hearing this news, Chen Yuding and the others who had just walked into the hotel hall were stunned. They stopped and looked at them in disbelief. "What? He's dead? How could it be so sudden? Our leader didn't plan to do anything, did he?" Chen Yuding asked in surprise. Yuan Tianqing walked straight to the clean sofas in the hall and said, "In fact, something happened the night you left. That's why Leader Wu quickly counterattacked. But this is still the result of someone stirring up trouble inside." He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Chen Yuding and the others sat around him curiously and asked, "Tell me what happened?" Yuan Tianqing said, "That night, one of Yang Chao's deputy leaders died. That guy, Pu Rukang, was bitten by a zombie that came out of nowhere. Then, for some reason, he ran into Haiqing's research institute and fought with someone in the institute. In the end, he was attacked from behind, and another researcher died because of it." Hearing the name Pu Luotsong, Chen Yuding was stunned for a moment. But soon he looked at Yuan Tianqing in shock. "What did you say? Pu Luotsong is dead? Was that person looking for trouble with him before?" However, Chen Yuding still didn't know that Pu Zhitsong was the mastermind behind Little Jin's death. Now he was just very surprised. That person had caused trouble for him not long ago. How did he suddenly die? Yuan Tianqing said, "Yes, they're not the only ones who died. And Yang Chao's sister, Yang Yin." Lin Feng and the others looked at him curiously and asked, Was it the woman who allowed the kids to harass Wenwen? How did she die? Who did it?" After that, they subconsciously looked at Lin Wenwen. Yuan Tianqing also glanced at Lin Wenwen and replied, "Miss Lu said she did it, but I heard that the woman's head, shoulder, and entire arm were bitten off by something. It was extremely tragic, and I heard that when she died, none of her people saw how she died." Lin Feng and the others looked at each other in surprise and asked, "Miss Lu? How did she get involved?" Yuan Tianqing said, "We're not sure about that, but that's what she said. She also found out that Yang Chao brought a level 7 paranormal helper to Haiqing base. The next day, at their high-level meeting, they directly took action. The reason was that Yang Chao secretly used hundreds of people in Haiqing base to do some virus experiments. All of them died, and he and some of his men were also infected with the virus. In the end, they turned into monsters that were neither humans nor zombies and were killed." "You said he used living people to do experiments? Oh my God!" Mrs. Lin exclaimed in shock. After all, after the end of the world, the population was already small. Yang Chao actually used living people to do experiments. This was too much of a psychopath. Moreover, from Yuan Tianqing's words, it seemed like those people had been secretly captured by him and had not gone willingly. Yuan Tianqing nodded and said, Yang Chao thought that your own experiments didn't find anything, but Leader Wu already knew about him. So he directly exposed this matter that day, and then cooperated with another leader in Haiqing Base to expel Yang Chao. Chen Yuding's face was full of anger when he heard that Yuan Tianqing only expelled Yang Chao. He asked with some dissatisfaction, why only expel? This kind of person should be killed. He thought about how his Xiaozhen was also infected by his people, and how they usually harm innocent people. Yuan Tianqing shook his head and said, expelling him is only the first step to remove his identity. The second step is the key. The second step is to punish him with the hundreds of people he killed, so that the people can be accounted for. Chen Yuding finally calmed down and nodded. That's true, Lin Feng said. Captain Chen, don't be angry. Tianqing just said that Yang Chao is also dead, so the people who should die are also dead. After comforting Chen Yuding, Lin Feng asked, what happened next? What happened next? Yuan Tianqing said, Yang Chao turned into a monster, and then he was killed by Leader Wu and the others. But I heard that his helpers saw that the situation wasn't good and turned around to escape. What? He ran away? Didn't Yang Chao die of anger? Mrs. Lin said in surprise. Yuan Tianqing smiled and nodded. Maybe. We weren't there, so we don't know his reaction. The others looked at each other. Imagining the scene back then, he couldn't help but want to laugh. So where did he find such an unreliable helper? By the way, who is the helper? Mrs. Lin thought it was funny and then asked curiously. Lin Wenwen said, Sister Lu said that he is a bandit during the apocalypse. Bandits? This Yang Chao was indeed a lunatic. Not only did he turn himself into a monster, he even colluded with the robbers outside. They could do anything, Mrs. Lin exclaimed. Yuan Tianqing suddenly thought of something and said with a serious expression, right, speaking of these bandits, we still have to be careful. Miss Lu said that he had been watching us the whole night. His target should be Wenwen, now that Yang Chao had fallen from power and he had been chased away. But he's a robber, so it's hard to say whether he'll continue to follow us. Hearing that a level 7 Doomsday Bandit might be targeting them, they were shocked. The members of the Lin family immediately became vigilant. That's possible. The bandits of the post-apocalyptic world were very vengeful, and they would do anything to get what they wanted. If he has his eyes on us, we'll be in trouble. Lin Feng's face darkened. Chapter 382. What's there to be afraid of? If he dares to come, I'll make him die here. A clear voice came. Everyone looked back and saw two girls, one beautiful and one ugly, coming out from the stairs. Chiu Lily swung her long black hair and came out with another girl with scales on her face. Lu Jun followed behind them with Tong Tong in her arms. The others looked at the two of them and felt a strong contrast. Lu Jun looked at Lin Wenwen's short hair and asked curiously, Hey, Miss Wenwen, what's wrong with your hair? Lin Wenwen smiled at her and said, Oh, it's nothing. I cut it myself. Lu Jun stared at her hair for a few seconds and couldn't help but say with pity, What a pity. Your long hair is very beautiful. Lin Wenwen just smiled and didn't speak. Lu Jun said, Your hair needs to be fixed. Do you need my help? Lin Wenwen's eyes lit up and said, Hey, can I? Lu Jun nodded with a smile. She said, I used to be a fashion designer, but after the apocalypse, people didn't pay much attention to this aspect, so I also lost my job. Cheng Wangshua looked at her in surprise and said, So that's how it is. No wonder I always feel that even if you just tie your hair casually behind your head, but it also suits you very well. Lu Jun just smiled faintly and said, Although my skills have stopped for a few years, I can still fix it for Miss Wenwen. I think you must want to cut it for her, because you can't stand her hairstyle. In fact, I've been tolerating it for a long time. Long Qingying suddenly said. Lin Wenwen glared at her and said, Didn't you cut this hairstyle for me? How dare you dislike it? Long Qingying shrugged and said with a blank face, I don't know how to cut it, but you still asked me to do it. It's my fault. Lin Wenwen was speechless. Chen Yuding asked uneasily, Miss Lu, when will she come back? Yuan Tianqing looked at him and said, We don't know her situation, but she will come back. Qiu Lily stood next to them with her arms crossed and said, Xiao Xiao seems to be upgrading little man. Maybe she will come back in a few days. Since all of you are here, we can start work tomorrow. Lin Feng and Yuan Tianxing both nodded and said, let's have a meeting here tomorrow morning to discuss where to start the construction. Everyone nodded. The girls didn't say anything. Anyway, they had nothing to do tomorrow. All right, it's almost time to eat. Let's go to the restaurant. Lin Feng patted his knees and stood up. Lin Luoren walks to Mrs. Lin and takes Lin Xiaolu to the dining room. The others stood up one after another and followed him to the restaurant. As for Wu Qingyue, he didn't see Meng Yu for the whole day. He didn't know if he was still in his room or if he had already gone out. In any case, he might have intentionally avoided Wu Qingyue. Wu Qingyue knew her current mood, but he couldn't interfere too much, so he didn't care. After breakfast, he took Wu Yueling out to work. At noon, Xiao Liqing came back with a strange look on his face and reported, Chief, Miss Lu's information. We can't get any information on her. Wu Qingyue was stunned. He put down the documents in his hands and looked up at him. Sealed? Who sealed it? Xiao Liqing shook his head and said, I'm not sure. I asked people from the former base. They all kept quiet. I think they're hiding Miss Lu's identity on purpose. By the way, Chief, why do you suddenly want to know her information? Wu Qingyue looked down thoughtfully and murmured, why did Yuan Tianxing and the others hide the information from her? Xiao Liqing shook his head and said, I'm not sure. Should we continue to investigate? Wu Qingyue smiled and said, Of course. Of course they would. Why wouldn't they? The more they hide something, the more we want to know. That's more interesting. Xiao Liqing nodded and said, Okay, then I'll continue to find out more information. Wu Qingyue said, Go. But ask Li Yushan to keep an eye on their new base and the neighborhood where Yuan Tianxing lived. Report to me immediately if there's any trace of Miss Lu. Xiao Liqing looked at him strangely and asked in confusion, Chief, is there a problem with Miss Lu? Why did you ask Yushan to keep an eye on her? Wu Qingyue just smiled mysteriously at him and said, You'll know the reason after the recent matters in the base are settled. By the way, remember not to let Meng Yu know about the matter I asked you to investigate Miss Lu. Yes. Xiao Liqing stood in front of his desk and was confused by his attitude. His head was full of question marks, but seeing that Wu Qingyue didn't want to say it, he could only suppress his curiosity and go do his work. After watching Xiao Liqing leave, Wu Qingyue thought it was strange why Yuan Tianxing and the others hid the female zombie's information. The female zombie's surname was Lu, so who was she before she died? Also, why did the face that had been restored look a little familiar? But he didn't expect that after she turned into a zombie, her body could actually recover to its original state. Thinking of this, a strange feeling flashed through Wu Qingyue's heart. Even the smile in his eyes deepened with the strange feeling in his heart, but he didn't realize it himself. She came with Yuan Tianxing, so she should be from the Hades King's base. But Wu Qingyue didn't understand. Was her identity so secret? Why didn't he let people investigate? But how could he not let him investigate? He had to investigate the background of the female zombie he wanted to marry. He didn't know if what the heavenly vine said about turning into a baby was true. If it was true, then how did it turn into a baby? Did it really borrow his and the female zombie's relationship, and then make the female zombie pregnant? It was unbelievable just thinking about it. If that was the case, then the baby's soul might be that heavenly vine, right? So, that heavenly vine borrowed his seed and the female zombie's ovum to create a body? Wu Qingyue slightly lowered his head and looked at his lower abdomen with a strange expression. Could it be that he had been scammed by a mutated plant with a high IQ, and his sperm had been borrowed? Then it made a biological child for him? After suddenly realizing the truth, Wu Qingyue's expression was dumbfounded. He stared at his lower abdomen, and then he felt his whole body was in trouble. Damn! Did it become a spirit after the apocalypse? Where did this vine spirit come from? How dare it trick his next generation? Ah! What kind of world was this? It was fine that he was cheated by a hateful woman last time, but why was he cheated by a mutated plant now? What a good little man. She dared to cheat him, her father, before she was even born. Let's see how I'll deal with her after she's born. But for now, he had to deal with her mother. Chapter 383. Just as Wu Qingyue was staring at his little brother in a daze, the office door suddenly opened. Xiao Yunlong rushed in and said angrily to him, "What did you say to Yu Yu?" Wu Qingyue recovered and looked up at him. Not caring about his attitude, he just asked indifferently, "What happened to her?" Xiao Yunlong glared at him angrily and said, "Tell me what you said to her first. Why is she so haggard like she has lost her soul? She didn't sleep all night last night, and her eyes are swollen from crying. She didn't even dare to go out today." Wu Qingyue stood up and came out from the desk. As he walked, he said to him, "Calm down first." Then he went to the sofa where Wu Yueling was sitting and sat down, pointing to the sofa next to him. Xiao Yunlong came over angrily, sat down and said, "Tell me what happened? Did you say anything after you went back yesterday? Otherwise, how could Yu, who is usually so calm, become like this?" Wu Qingyue said, "I have already laid it out with her. I know she can't bear it, but I don't have much time on my side. If I don't tell her now, it will be too late in the future." Xiao Yunlong was taken aback for a moment, the anger on his face slightly subsiding. He then asked, "What's the matter with you? Why did you suddenly lay it out with her?" Wu Qingyue said, "Because I am going to find a mother for Lingling. So now I want her to cut off those thoughts about me as soon as possible, so that she won't have any objections when I bring her back." Xiao Yunlong stared at him with wide eyes, somewhat surprised. You, what did you say? You're going to get married? Find a stepmother for Lingling? What about Lingling? What if the woman you marry bullies my goddaughter behind my back? Who is she?" Wu Qingyue looked at his reaction with amusement and said indifferently, "Don't be so excited. It's me who married her, not you. Why are you so worried? If a woman who will hurt Lingling, do you think I will marry her? Is my character and IQ that bad?" Xiao Yunlong sat there with his back straight, looking at him with a confused expression. "No. You really want to find a woman? Are you serious?" Wu Qingyue said, "The rice has been cooked. Don't you want to continue eating?" Xiao Yunlong once again stared at him, as if he had seen a ghost. "Last time you were also cooked in a rice by her. Why didn't I see you marry her back?" Wu Qingyue was stunned, and then stared at him expressionlessly. "Can I marry you like that last time? Why don't you take a look at what kind of woman she is? If I let a scumbag rape you, you have to marry her back for me." Xiao Yunlong immediately withered. "Forget about that. I can't afford it. So that's why you told you about this? What kind of person is he? What's his background?" Wu Qingyue shook his head and said, "You'll know in the future, but we haven't found out her background yet." Xiao Yunlong looked him up and down and said with a somewhat strange expression, "I remember that you seem to have gone to Yuan Tianqing's place to pick up Lingling that day. So you went back last night. So it was to do this. There are only two women over there. It's either Lin Wenwen or the woman with the katana next to her. You wouldn't have slept with one of them, right?" As he said this, he frowned and thought that it didn't seem right. "Well, we all know Lin Wenwen's background, but you just said that you didn't find out her background. Wouldn't it be the woman with the katana? Called Long Qing or something?" Wu Qingyue shook his head at him and said, "You think too much, it's not them." Then he saw Xiao Yunlong looking at him with a strange expression. "Ah, not them? Then who else could it be? Did you run into some luck and ran into the bushes?" Wu Qingyue sighed and waved his hand at him. "Oh, forget it. It would be strange if you could guess it with your IQ. Now that I have offended you, it's very embarrassing to see her." Therefore, Lingling and I will be staying here for a period of time. You should take this opportunity to persuade her. I go persuade her? She has always listened to you." Hearing Wu Qingyue telling him to comfort Mengyu, Xiao Yunlong said a little helplessly. Wu Qingyue stood up and said, "You're not going? If you're not going, I'll let Little Cheng go. Little Cheng, come in." As he spoke, he suddenly shouted towards the door and walked towards his desk. Xiao Yunlong looked at him with a confused face. He said to let Xiao Liqing comfort Mengyu. Did this mean that he wanted to matchmake the two of them? Seeing Xiao Liqing open the door and come in, he immediately stood up in fright. He said, "I'll go." "Why do you want Little Cheng to go? He can't speak, As he said this, he immediately turned around and walked out. Xiao Liqing looked blankly at the two people, and then looked at the tall back of Xiao Yunlong walking out. After Wu Qingyue watched Xiao Yunlong go out, he sat at his desk and said to Xiao Liqing, "I will live here with Lingling during this period of time. Go back and pack my and Lingling's clothes." Xiao Liqing nodded, yes. Wu Qingyue waved his hand to him, go. Wu Yueling had been sitting and playing by herself, not at all concerned about the words of the adults. At this time, she looked up at the drawing board in her hand. She put down the pen and then slid down the drawing board. Stepping on her small shoes, she ran over to Wu Qingyue holding the drawing board. Wu Qingyue was about to start processing the information, but stopped when he saw her movements. Then he turned his head to look at her. Then he saw her running over with her short legs, and then leaning against his leg, she handed him the drawing board in her hand. What did Lingling draw? Wu Qingyue lovingly stroked her head and asked. Then he turned his head and saw the pattern drawn by Wu Yueling on the drawing board. Children's drawings were always very abstract, probably just a rough drawing, and then a simple distribution of colors. But a child's drawing could still tell something. Well, there were 3 people, 2 adults and a child in the middle. But why was one of the adults bald? He pointed to the little person in the middle, looked at Wu Yueling and asked, "Well, Lingling, you drew this, is it you?" Wu Yueling looked at him with sparkling eyes and nodded to him. Wu Qingyue pointed to the 2 adults with longer hair and asked, "Then who is this?" Wu Yueling pointed to him and just looked at him without saying a word. Wu Qingyue continued to point to the last bald head and asked, "Then who is this?" Wu Yueling's expression was a little confused. Then she pointed to her head and then rubbed her hands. Perhaps she felt that the expression was not clear enough, so she looked left and right, not knowing what she was looking for. Suddenly, she gestured in front of her chest, drawing 2 circular arcs. Wu Qingyue was dumbfounded as he looked at his pure and adorable baby daughter suddenly become dirty. Chapter 384. Just like that, Wu Qingyue sent people to investigate Lin Xiao's background, but it didn't go well. On the other hand, he sent people to guard Lin Xiao's new base, but Lin Xiao didn't appear. In less than 2 days, a group of strange people suddenly entered their Sea City base. Then they directly came to Wu Qingyue's office. There were 2 people who came, and they also brought a big dog. It was a mutant wolf dog, tall and powerful, with an overbearing aura. The 2 people who came were not simple either, because one of them was a level 7 ability user, and the other was not low, either at level 6. Moreover, the dog's level was unusually high. Xiao Liqing brought the 2 people and the dog to the door of Wu Qingyue's office, and said to the 2 people, "Wait a moment, our leader is inside." Lei Cheng and his people stopped in their tracks. His handsome face was expressionless, and he didn't say anything. Xiao Liqing turned around and knocked on Wu Qingyue's door, then pushed it open and took half a step inside. "Leader, they're here." Wu Qingyue, who was sitting at his desk dealing with documents, immediately put down the pen in his hand and casually stamped the document. Then he stood up and walked out of the chair. "Let them in." Xiao Liqing took a step outside, then made a gesture to the people outside to invite them in. When he opened the door, he saw 2 tall and strong men walking in. Behind them was a quiet big dog. Wu Qingyue took a look at their dog, then smiled at them and said, "Hello, I'm Wu Qingyue. How should I address you two?" The 2 men were about the same height, but the one who spoke was slightly shorter and had delicate and handsome features. He said expressionlessly, "My name is Lei Cheng, and he is Zheng Hao." Wu Qingyue gestured to the sofa and said, "Please sit." "Oh, by the way, you can see that I have a child here. So your dog, can I trouble you to ask it to wait outside?" As he spoke, he looked apologetically at the dog that was as tall as an adult's thigh. Since the dog came in, it had been quietly following Lei Cheng's feet. It didn't look up or sniff around. Although it wasn't leashed, it didn't leave a step away from Lei Cheng. Wherever Lei Cheng went, it would follow. Hearing Wu Qingyue's request, Lei Cheng didn't show any dissatisfaction. He just lowered his head slightly and said to the dog, "Early Eye, go out and guard the door." The wolfhound heard his words and looked up at him. He immediately turned around and walked towards the door with his tail drooping. Wu Qingyue knew that the mutant dog's IQ was very high. Furthermore, it was very intelligent and could understand simple human speech. Therefore, when the dog was called out by its owner, it obediently walked out. Wu Qingyue did not find it strange. Mutated animals and plants had one thing in common, which was that they were easily stimulated and went crazy. Once he was affected by something and went crazy, it would be very troublesome. When Wu Yueling saw a stranger come in, she immediately turned around and ran to the lounge next to her. After they sat down, Xiao Liqing poured them 2 glasses of water and placed them on the table. Then he stood in the corner next to Wu Qingyue as the background. Wu Qingyue said, "May I know where you two are from? Is there anything I can help you with?" There must be something going on for someone he didn't know to come looking for him. If they weren't here to cause trouble, then of course they were here to ask for help. Lei Ching looked at him and said, "We're here to ask about Tang He." Wu Qingyue was stunned. He didn't seem to have heard of this name. So he asked doubtfully, "Allow me to ask, who is Tang He?" Lei Ching glanced at Zheng Hao next to him. Then Zheng Hao took out a piece of A4 paper from the bag in his hand. There was a photo on the paper. Then he handed it to Wu Qingyue. "Leader Wu, this person is Tang He." Maybe you don't know his name, but I think many of you should have seen him, Zheng Hao said after handing over the information. Wu Qingyue took a look at the photo and immediately recognized that this was Yang Chao's helper, who was pointed out by the female zombie in the conference hall that day. He said in surprise, "It's him? You're looking for him." Lei Ching said, "This person is a traitor of our base. He escaped because he committed a serious crime in our base. We were sent by the base to capture him and report back." Wu Qingyue looked at the two of them and said, "So that's how it is. But this Tang, he seems to be a level 7 metal-type metahuman, an attack-type metahuman. If it's just the two of you, it seems like it'll be very difficult to catch him, right?" He didn't say that even if the two of them worked together, they probably wouldn't be able to catch Tang He. A level 7 metahuman was already a very rare powerhouse, not to mention their powerful attack power. Even if there were 2 metahumans of the same level, it would be very difficult to win if it wasn't for the difference in attributes, let alone capturing someone. Moreover, if a level 7 metahuman wanted to escape, it would be very easy. Lei Ching nodded and said, "I know what you mean, but this time it's not just the two of us. So you don't have to worry about it." Wu Qingyue looked at him and suddenly asked with a light smile, "Your arrest team can send a level 7 and a level 6 metahuman. Can I know where you are from? Could it be that you came from the Huaxia base in the capital?" Huaxia base is the largest survivor base in the country. There are 7 leaders there, and all of them are level 8 metahumans. Currently, among the major bases in the country, only China has so many level 8 metahumans. Therefore, China is now a strong base that doesn't fear anyone. The living conditions and environment there are naturally better, safer, and more high-end than these level 2 bases. Of course, Huaxia base still recruits residents. But to enter, you need to have zombie cores, and you have to pay the corresponding crystal cores every month for how long you stay. If you don't have them, then you will be directly kicked out. Wu Qingyue felt that a level 7 metahuman came here randomly. Most likely, he came from there because their base is not far from Huaxia base. However, Lei Ching shook his head and said, "It's not convenient for us to disclose information about our base. But I can tell you that we have nothing to do with Huaxia base." Wu Qingyue looked at him with some surprise and said, "Oh, is that so? All right then, I asked too much. I'm sorry." Lei Ching's face was expressionless, and he said carelessly, "It's all right, Leader Wu, don't worry about it. Now, we just need to trouble you to tell us what was the situation when Tang he left last time. This is our reward for exchanging information." As he spoke, he suddenly took out a zombie core and placed it in front of Wu Qingyue. This was the zombie core of a level 6 zombie king. Chapter 385. Wu Qingyue looked at the zombie core and thought about whether he would be able to smoothly enter level 8 after absorbing it. If so, then it could directly make up for the gap in strength after Yang Chao's death. Oh, he seems to be a helper invited by another trader in our base, but I don't know why he suddenly ran away when we were fighting. Lei Cheng didn't say anything, but Zheng Hao said in surprise, "Hey, you have a trader here?" Two traders together. Sure enough, birds of a feather flocked together. Wu Qingyue spread his hands and said, "The leader of my base secretly experimented on living people in the base, so the other leader and I had to get rid of him." Lei Cheng said, "Then you didn't catch Tang He that day?" He only cared about the news of Tang He. Wu Qingyue said, "We really didn't catch him. It was our leader Zhou who chased him that day. But it didn't take long for him to run out of the base, so we didn't continue to chase him. He didn't seem to have any intention of fighting us." Hearing this, Lei Cheng didn't ask any more questions, but directly stood up. He politely nodded to Wu Qingyue. "This information is enough. Thank you, Leader Wu. Then we won't disturb you." Wu Qingyue also stood up, seeing that they were in a hurry to leave. He asked in surprise, "Huh? Why are you leaving so soon?" Lei Cheng shook his head and said, "We have a mission, so we won't stay any longer. Thank you for your kindness." Wu Qingyue had to say to them, "Okay, take care. Xiao Cheng, see them out," he said as he sent the two to the door, but didn't continue to send them out. Instead, he let Xiao Liqing see them out. Xiao Liqing sent them out of the base, then came back to report. "They left the base, leader. Do you know where they came from?" Wu Qingyue shook his head and said, "I don't know. But looking at them, it seems that they are indeed looking for the level 7 psychic called Tang He." Xiao Liqing nodded. Wu Qingyue asked him, "You still haven't investigated the background of that female zombie?" Xiao Liqing shook his head at him innocently. It was not that he was incapable. They really couldn't find anything, and Yuan Tianqing and the others had long left the base. He could only find out from the people who stayed behind. However, that rank 5 ability user called Du Yuanqing, although he was usually a little brainless, he was very stubborn about this matter. No matter what they did, they couldn't get anything out of him. Wu Qingyue stroked his chin and said, "It's been so long, yet we still haven't found anything. Isn't this female zombie too mysterious?" While Wu Qingyue was ferociously investigating Lin Xiao was still wrapped in the rattan ball. However, after a few days, the originally huge rattan ball had shrunk by 1/3, but there were still 2/3 that continued to drill into her. Shen Yuzhen, who was on the shore of the lake, still stared at the lake from time to time. However, after waiting for a few days, Lin Xiao did not come up. Ever since she saw Wu Qingyue walk into the lake naked that day, Shen Yuzhen had been wondering if the situation below was what she thought it was. Lin Xiao, who was in front, went down naked, and Wu Qingyue also went down naked. A man, a woman. What were the two of them doing at the bottom of the lake without any clothes on? Moreover, Wu Qingyue carried Lin Xiao up if the two of them were still fine. Who would believe it? However, after Wu Qingyue left, the rattan brought Lin Xiao into the lake again, and she still hadn't come out. Who knew what she was doing down there for so long? At this time, Lin Xiao, who was at the bottom of the lake, was in a state of suspended consciousness. Little man's main body, the rattan, turned into a condensed energy that seeped into her body. This energy nourished each of Lin Xiao's muscles, activated the cells inside, and then purified the blood in her veins. The cells that were previously activated were filtered out again. Then the discarded cells were burned by a wave of black gas. After being repaired by little man's energy, the dead cells in Lin Xiao's body had basically been slowly replaced. Only the cells of the internal organs were still in the process of being manufactured. Right now, Lin Xiao's body was being repaired by little man's powerful energy. She was doing the last step of the repair, which was her intestines. The intestines that were originally hollowed out were growing out bit by bit. Meanwhile, little man's other energy and her aura were gathering bit by bit towards Lin Xiao's lower abdomen. There was also a very masculine energy circling there. When little man's aura and energy entered these masculine energy domains, the few of them mixed together. Then they began to rotate and slowly fuse. However, the fusion here was much slower than the regeneration of Lin Xiao's cells. The intestines in Lin Xiao's stomach were also growing very slowly. The living blood in her body that had been purified began to flow back towards her heart. At this time, in the Netherworld King's base, in the meeting room of the government building, a slender and straight figure stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling glass window, looking at the base that had lost a lot of people. He had shoulder-length hair and a handsome face, a pair of long and narrow eyes. The corners of his eyes were raised upwards, and his eyebrows were light. He had a high nose bridge and sexy thin lips. The corners of his mouth carried a trace of a confident smile. There was an inexplicable luster in his eyes as he looked out of the window. It was as warm and moist as water, but it seemed to reveal a kind of temptation. Delicate but unidentifiable androgynous facial features, and because of his slightly long hair, there was a bit of femininity. He stood there, his whole body exuding a kind of elegant aura. At this moment, the door of the meeting room suddenly opened, and a soldier stood at the door. Deputy Leader Yang is back. Long Yubai turned around and smiled gently at the soldier. Is he back? Let him in. The soldier looked at his smile, and there was a second of infatuation in his expression. But soon, he covered it up and turned around to leave. Then he saw Yang Jianhua walk in. Yang Jianhua walked in wearing a white suit. After seeing Long Yubai, a ray of light flashed in his eyes. He strode over and hugged Long Yubai's slender and straight body from behind. Then he leaned his face close to Long Yubai's ear and took a deep breath, looking at him in fascination. Have you thought about it? There was still a faint smile on Long Yubai's beautiful face. He turned slightly and said to him, How did it go? Yang Jianhua was stunned, and then he said indifferently, They ran away. I've already chased them for a long time. I believe they won't come back. Long Yubai smiled, but a cold light flashed in his eyes. He said, Come back. This base is like this now. So what if they can come back? We have already taken all the resources in this base. This place is no longer of any use to us. You should know that I want you to kill those people to prevent future troubles. Chapter 386. Yang Jianhua's handsome face had a flattering smile as he said, I was about to succeed, but Yuan Tianqing suddenly appeared. With him around, I couldn't kill all of them. Long Yubai pulled his arm away, then took a step back, turned around, and walked toward the desk. After being pulled away, Yang Jianhua's eyes flashed with a trace of grievance. However, he didn't show it. Instead, he turned around and walked behind Long Yubai. So you went for so long, but in the end, you came back empty-handed? And you came back alone? Did you abandon the 10 chariots I sent you? Long Yubai asked him as he walked. Yang Jianhua walked behind him. When he was about to sit in the chair, he suddenly reached out and grabbed him. Then, he pulled him back forcefully and said to him with some dissatisfaction, What? Do you care whether those people died or not? Do you care about your chariots? What about me? Long Yubai's body wasn't as tall as Yang Jianhua. When Yang Jianhua pulled him back, he bumped into his arms and was hugged again. Hearing Yang Jianhua's words, he sighed and said, But we spent a lot of effort to build those chariots. In the end, we gave them to you, but you threw them outside. It doesn't matter if you didn't kill them. Anyway, they can't do anything. Yang Jianhua said to him, It's good that you know. It's my fault for losing the chariots. But it can't be helped. I met someone stronger than me. I can only save my life first. If I can rise to rank 7, I'll definitely be able to survive. If I can reach rank 7, this operation will definitely not fail. Long Yubai lowered his face slightly on his chest. From Yang Jianhua's angle, he could only see his slightly drooping long eyelashes. However, he couldn't see a trace of displeasure flashing in his eyes under his eyelashes. He raised his head and looked at him with a pair of watery eyes. Jianhua, I said that when you come back with me to the Earth Dragon base, I'll give you the rank 6 corpse core. I'll let you directly break through to rank 7, but you refuse to go back with me. What's there to stay here for? Yang Jianhua looked at his eyes and handsome and delicate face. His eyes fell on his lips, and he inexplicably felt that his throat was a little dry. He lowered his head and kissed Long Yubai's lips. Her wet tongue hurriedly swept across Long Yubai's lips. Then Pride opened his teeth and burrowed in. Then, she forcefully swept her tongue across his mouth. Long Yubai narrowed his eyes slightly and allowed Yang Jianhua to stir the food in his mouth as he placed his hands on Yang Jianhua's firm chest muscles. She gently caressed him and then hooked the back of his neck. The two kissed passionately for a while before separating. Yang Jianhua calmed his breathing and rubbed his lower body against Long Yubai's. Long Yubai raised his somewhat hazy eyes and looked at him, saying, "Since you're back, come back to the Earth Dragon with me." Yang Jianhua calmed himself down and said, "Didn't you promise to hand over the Netherworld King's base to me? Why do you want me to go to the Earth Dragon with you now?" Long Yubai said, "But the two bases are hundreds of kilometers away from each other. Then you won't be able to follow me around every day, right?" However, Yang Jianhua said, "Why must I follow them? Isn't it good for me to stay here? This base belongs to me now. Wouldn't it be too wasteful to give it up like this?" Long Yubai stared into his eyes for a while before saying, "Is it because you can't give up this abandoned base? Or is it because you can't bear to part with other things?" Yang Jianhua was stunned for a moment. He slightly loosened his hand and looked at him, asking, "What do you mean?" Long Yubai pushed him away, then turned around and walked out of the conference hall without saying a word. He no longer had the patience to waste any more time with this man. If it wasn't for the fact that he was a level 6 ability user and could help him do a lot of things, Yang Jianhua would have directly fallen out with him. Yang Jianhua had directly fallen out with him. Long Yubai was a smart man. He didn't have the ability to create and manage a base, but he would find someone to manage it, especially those who loved him so much that they were infatuated with him. He would use their willingness to do things for him, and Yang Jianhua was one of them. In fact, Long Yubai didn't contribute much to the establishment of the Earth Dragon base. It could be said that it was built as a gift from someone else. However, Yang Jianhua wasn't a devoted person. He was only interested in her. He only wanted to get his hands on everything. He was already on his side, but he still dared to be reluctant to part with Lin Wenwen. Did he really think that he didn't know? Looking at Long Yubai's figure walking out of the door, Yang Jianhua just had a gloomy face. After an entire week, Lin Xiao woke up from her still state of consciousness. When she woke up, she found that it was still dark in front of her, and she couldn't see anything. But soon she felt the changes in her body and around her. She felt that little man's energy had filled her whole body. Every cell and blood was filled with this kind of healing and nourishing energy. She also felt a burst of hunger coming from her stomach. This feeling made her subconsciously swallow her saliva. Lin Xiao felt a bit strange. Why did she feel hungry? After she became a zombie, she had been drinking lake water and using the energy in the water to maintain her hunger. After that, she didn't have this kind of feeling. What was going on now? And the surroundings were filled with little man's energy. But Lin Xiao found it strange that there was no little man's aura around her. "Huh? Little man, are you still there?" Lin Xiao shouted in her heart. If she guessed correctly, she should still be at the bottom of the lake. This state where her whole body was wrapped in energy, although it was a bit different from before. But thinking about the previous situation, she still knew her situation. "Mama, you finally woke up." Little man's message came from Lin Xiao's mind. Lin Xiao asked in her heart, "Where are you? Why can't I feel your aura? Are you still in the lake?" Little man's message was a bit erratic. "Mama, little man has now finished upgrading. Where am I?" And little man is in Mama's stomach. Lin Xiao felt even more strange. Inside her stomach? How did it run into her stomach? What was the meaning of this? She couldn't help but ask, "Why are you in my stomach? You're so big. How can you get into my stomach?" Little man replied, "Actually, the little man that Mama saw before were only formed by energy. Little man didn't have a physical body. This time, because I wanted to upgrade Mama and resurrect her body, Little Man poured all of its energy into Mama's body. Little Man didn't have any energy to rely on, so it could only get into Mama's stomach. You don't have a physical body? Lin Xiao was a bit shocked. Little Man actually didn't have a physical body. Were all the vines she saw before energy bodies? Chapter 387. Lin Xiao suddenly remembered that she was raped by a man, and it was caused by this little man. Could it be? Could it be because of this that little man brought a man in for her? Then, while tricking the two of them into making a human, she put herself into her stomach. Lin Xiao was confused and asked in surprise, "Little man, you didn't run into my womb? Did you? Are you going to become my baby?" After she asked, she immediately heard Little Man's excited voice in her mind. Did Mama guess it? Yes, Little Man is now in Mama's stomach, and she has already caught Mama's little egg and Papa's little tadpole, and then combined them together. Now they have become Little Man's body, but they are still very, very small. Lin Xiao was speechless. Fuck! After getting Little Man's affirmative answer, Lin Xiao felt very uncomfortable. Wait a minute. Wasn't she a zombie? She was already a dead person. How could she still get pregnant? She couldn't help saying, "Little Man, are you kidding me?" Little Man asked strangely. Little Man is not kidding Mama. Lin Xiao still couldn't believe it and said, "Then why are you in my stomach? I'm already a zombie. How can I still have a baby?" Even if she was slept with by a man, it was impossible for her to win the bid, right? And she got it on the first try? Did the probability have to be so 100%? Little Man said, "Because Little Man has used all her energy to help Mama resurrect, because Mama needs a man to stimulate her during the resurrection. So Little Man asked Mama to find a man to come in, and now Little Man has used all her energy to help Mama resurrect and upgrade. Little Man has no energy to maintain her original form, so she had to run into Mama's stomach anyway. Papa's little tadpole is here. He. It meant that Little Man had used all her energy to maintain her original form to help Lin Xiao repair and activate her body. In the end, she needed a man in the process, and he had to do that kind of thing. Lin Xiao felt that it was for her own good. But why did she feel that this child was a bit too much to cheat her mother? She didn't know how to react. Xiao Lin was a little confused. So you brought a man in for me? Moreover, he had secretly gotten it in? Why didn't you tell me first? Also, who was that man? Little Man replied, because Tiny Tot. Tiny Tot likes Mama very much. She said that she wants Mama to be her mama. So that man is Tiny Tot's papa, Lin Xiao. Who are you talking about? Little Man, Tiny's daddy, Lin Xiao. Come out. I'm going to kill you. Oh my God. Of all people, why did you have to trick that man? That man had already been cheated by Lu Tianyu once, and this time, he was cheated by her again. Apui. It was all because of Little Man. Moreover, she had also been cheated. Thinking back, that man seemed to be conscious at that time, and he clearly knew it was her. Only she didn't know who he was. No, she was raped this time. At that time, she was the one who couldn't resist at all. Not him. Little Man replied shyly. Mama, calm down. If you get too excited and lose me, then Little Man will be dead. Lose Lin Xiao. She really needed some peace and quiet. Be quiet. Be quiet. Important things have to be said 3 times. Be quiet the hell. This damn vine. Of all men, why did it have to be Wu Qingyue, that smiling fox? Lin Xiao gritted her teeth and said in her heart, "You're so awesome that you even created your own body. Are you still afraid that I'll lose you? The union of a zombie and a human. How did you do it? Come out and tell me clearly." At this time, her heart was simply filled with mixed feelings. She was angry, surprised, happy, and also tricked again. She was angry that Little Man had done such an important thing for her first. She didn't even discuss it with her beforehand, in case something happened. Then wouldn't Little Man, who had lost her energy, be in danger? Also, what if she did that with that man, but she didn't win the bid? Then where was Little Man going to find a carrier to carry her? And wait a minute, How could she forget that when that man spurted out at the end, he seemed to have spurted out a lot? Little Man said carefully, and because, Mama, you don't seem to like Tiny Tot's papa, and I'm afraid that if I tell you, what if you don't agree? Tiny Tot will cry. Lin Xiao thought indeed, if Little Man dared to tell her in advance that the man she was looking for was surnamed Wu, then she definitely wouldn't do it. She held her breath and said, "So you tricked your mama, right? And even got raped by him. What method did you use to get him in here? And if he's a normal person, he shouldn't do this kind of thing to me casually. What did you do to him?" Little Man said, because Little Man leveled up, although Little Man can't go out, but I can release the energy of my body through Mama. So I pulled Tiny Tot's papa in. After saying that, Little Man paused for a moment, and then said, and after coming in, Little Man didn't do anything to him. She just released a scent that would have reproductive cues for him to smell. Then he could enter that state. Reproductive cues? Was there such a thing? And this was an aphrodisiac? So he knew that he couldn't control his own body even when he was conscious. So at this time, Little Man sent her naked into his arms. If this wasn't throwing herself into his arms, what was it? Although she was the one who was sent. So the current situation was that Little Man made use of their human-making activity to create her. This time, she really became a living baby. Lin Xiao couldn't help but ask, "So you're really staying in my womb now? You resurrected my identity as a human, and then you ran in and squatted in my stomach? You didn't even tell me in advance. Do you know that you're lying to me?" The more she spoke, the angrier she became, and Lin Xiao's tone also became bad. Seeming to feel that Lin Xiao was really angry, Little Man immediately said coquettishly, "Well, Mama, I was wrong. Don't be angry. I won't dare to do it again." Lin Xiao said angrily, "Now that you know you're wrong, why didn't you tell me before?" Little Man said with some grievance, "Woo-woo, because I was afraid that Mama wouldn't agree with Tiny Tot's papa." Chapter 388. Hearing Little Man's aggrieved voice, Lin Xiao still couldn't get angry. After all, Little Man had been with her for a long time, and Lin Xiao knew that she could be a little willful sometimes. But she was doing it for her own good. Thinking of this, Lin Xiao's anger slowly subsided. After thinking for a while, Lin Xiao asked, "What's the condition of my body now? Hasn't it been repaired yet?" She wanted to touch her body, but she couldn't move her hands. Seeing that she changed the topic, Little Man immediately breathed a sigh of relief and replied, "Mama's body has been activated now, but only 1/3 of the heart has been activated, and 2/3 of it is still not alive. Now I just need to wait for Mama's body to absorb Little Man's energy, and then I can go out." Lin Xiao asked in surprise, "Is my heart alive?" She didn't expect that Little Man would come back to life and save her heart. Lu Tianyu's body had been dead for a few months, but now it could still be resurrected. Little Man was really amazing. Little Man replied, well, it also needs Mama's own energy, Papa's energy, and Little Man's energy to activate it. Mama may still need to absorb for 2 days before she can go up." Lin Xiao nodded and said, "Okay, 2 more days? How long have I been down?" Little Man counted. It seems to be 8 days," Lin Xiao sighed. It seemed that she still had to wait for 2 more days. But when she thought of how to face Wu Qingyue in the future, she didn't know. It would be fine if he didn't know who she was, but he clearly knew who she was. If they met, it would be very awkward. Although both of them were cheated, it was not voluntary. So it was better not to meet. If he knew that her body was Lu Tianyu, it would be even more fun. After she went out, she'd better slip away quickly. She would go to the new base to see the situation. If everything went well, she would leave for the south and avoid Wu Qingyue. She said in her heart, "Little Man, if you have such a big thing in the future, you must tell me first, okay? If you are really my child, I won't care about you, but in the future." Seeing that she had stopped pursuing it, Little Man replied happily, "Little Man knows that I was wrong, and I won't dare to do it in the future." "Xiao Lin, that's good. That's right. Does he know that I won the bid this time? You didn't tell him? Did you?" "Little Man," Lin Xiao had a bad feeling. What was with this silence? Why you? Don't tell me you told him too. If little man was standing in front of her, her two little fingers should be pointing at each other at this moment, and then she would feel a little wronged. A little man doesn't have hands. She should be poking him with her vines. I told him, little man told Papa everything. Lin Xiao broke down. Why did you tell him? This way he will definitely come and pester me. How dare you call her Papa? Oh my God. She wanted to let that man know that she was pregnant with his child, and that the child was little man who had cheated them. Would he let them go? As if. Now was not the time to pursue who was right and who was wrong. Anyway, the last time it was not her, but Lu Tianyu. But now that she had accepted Lu Tianyu's body, she had also accepted her sins. So this time, she had been cheated by the brat and raped by Wu Qingyue again. Lin Xiao already had a premonition that the following days would be disrupted by Wu Qingyue. Lin Xiao was already in a bad state, and she continued to break down. Little man said, but he is already little man's papa, Lin Xiao. Could she beat this brat to death? Wasn't this completely betraying her as a mother? Little man who had sensed her thoughts. What should she do? She didn't dare to go out now. If she went out, she would be beaten by Mama. Just like that, Lin Xiao and little man stayed at the bottom of the lake for another 2 days. On the other side, Wu Qingyue asked Xiao Liqing to investigate and finally found some clues about the female zombie. You said that the person who did this is on Leader Zhou's side? Wu Qingyue sat on the sofa with Wu Yueling in his arms and looked up at him with some surprise. Xiao Liqing stood in the open space in front of him and nodded. Yes, it's that Kong Qingming. He has been secretly obstructing our investigation. Wu Qingyue touched his chin strangely and asked, why does he want to obstruct us from investigating the background of that zombie? Is there any inside story? Xiao Liqing shook his head, thought for a moment and guessed. Is it because he wants to protect Miss Lu? After all, didn't Miss Lu save them in Hangzhou last time? Maybe he thinks that we are going to do something bad to her. Wu Qingyue looked at him and said, what else can we do to her? Aren't we in a cooperative relationship now? Does he think that I am that kind of person with a bad character? He helped me, so why would I go and harm others? Xiao Liqing shrugged and said, I think we have to ask him himself. Wu Qingyue carried Wu Yueling on the ground and stood up. All right, since he knows something, then let's go. Okay, since he knows something, then we can go talk to him directly. There's no need to spend so much effort to investigate. If he doesn't want to say, then we can only ask old Zhou to do it. Xiao Liqing didn't think that he would ask Kong Qingming directly. He looked at him in a daze. Ah! Wu Qingyue glanced at him and pulled Wu Yueling out. What are you talking about? Let's go. Where is he now? Xiao Liqing came back to his senses and immediately followed. Yes. On the other side, lying on the sofa in Lu Tianyu's office, Kong Qingming frowned and said, I can't stop the information about your sister. Moreover, they might have already noticed us. What if Leader Wu comes looking for us? What are you going to do? Then he looked at Lu Tianyi, who was sitting at the desk. Lu Tianyi stopped writing and looked up in a daze. Then he thought for a moment before looking at Kong Qingming and said, if he really comes, then I think we can ask him why he is here. Why does he keep chasing after my sister? What is his intention? Kong Qingming was stunned and then looked at him strangely. You're asking him directly? How dare you? At this time, the guard outside the door knocked and came in. Minister, Leader Wu is here. Lu Tianyi and Kong Qingming. Speak of the devil. The two looked at each other and quickly stood up. Then they saw Wu Qingyue walk in with Wu Yueling, followed by Xiao Liqing and 2 soldiers. Leader, why are you here? Lu Tianyi looked at Wu Qingyue and greeted him. Wu Qingyue smiled and said, why? Am I not allowed to come? Lu Tianyi said awkwardly, No. It's just that I'm a little flattered by the leader's sudden arrival. Please sit. The two of them retreated and then invited Wu Qingyue to sit on the sofa. Wu Qingyue pulled Lingling to sit on the sofa and then waved at the two of them to sit on the sofa next to them. You two sit down too. Let's talk. That you're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.